Coming up on UGTV, Standing Committee Meetings of the Unified Government of Wyandotte County, Kansas City, Kansas. A meeting of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. This will be followed by a meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee.
Call this meeting to order of the Neighborhood and Community Development Standing Committee. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call: Walters.
Here.
McGee.
Here.
Townsend.
Present.
McKiernan.
Here.
Walker.
Here. We want to welcome everyone to the meeting tonight. If you have an item that you wish to address the committee on, you will need to come to the podium and microphone, state your name and address, and you will be recognized. Apparently the first item on our agenda is the land bank applications.
Good evening, Commissioners.
Oh, I'm sorry, I always forget the minutes. We do have the minutes from the March 7th, 2016 meeting.
Move for approval.
Second.
We have a motion and second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any
Aye.
opposed? None opposed. All right. We do have a number of items on the land bank agenda. Would you care to present?
Yes, good evening, Commissioners. Charles Brockman, Economic Development, filling in for Chris Slaughter. He's out on some business tonight. So we're looking at 4 applications and some property acquisitions and some property deeded back to Mount Carmel tonight. So I wanted to start off with the applications. There are 4 applications. There's the addresses. And what I'll do is I'll go through them and then I'll show where they're at on the map. And then I'll go into detail what the projected tax is on those. So our first one is 2811 South 37th Street. The structure to the left is the property owner, and that is the outline in the green is the property. So the applicant owns 2814 South 36th Street. They purchased that property from the land bank in January 2015, and they're current on their property taxes. So the advisory board voted to forward this to commission for final approval. the appraised value is $13,000 with an estimated potential tax of $300. So our next property is located at 2605 North 11th Street. The property is north of the property owner, and that's at 1050 Roland. The applicant is current on their taxes and has no open code cases. It's appraised value at $180, roughly $5 in projected tax.
Charles, hang on
Yes,
just a
sir.
second, please. That's 1050, not 1510.
10,
I guess it doesn't matter. The agenda, there's a table that has the first 15 pieces of property. Yeah, listed as 1510 Roland.
I'll double check that with Chris
Okay.
and get back with you, Commissioner.
I mean, I'm fine with it either way. We just should be clear on what piece of property it actually is.
Well, didn't he have a map? Could you go
Keep
back?
going.
Okay.
Okay.
That's fine.
Right now, it's I don't even see that. I don't either. I don't either.
New Jersey.
Go back to the last property, Charles.
So that's 2605 North 11th is the property we're talking about.
Right.
So the applicant's address is probably 1050 Roland.
So where is the applicant's home address? Is it on this map?
The box.
1050 Roland Avenue.
Could you orient us to where that is on your aerial there?
Okay.
Thank you.
We're good. Okay.
If I had better eyes, I could probably read that.
That's why I had to get up that close to see it myself.
All right, proceed, Charles.
Okay. The next address is 2605 North 11th, 1050 Roland. Appraised value was $180, and it's $5 in the taxes. So the next yard extension is 1504 New Jersey Avenue. The applicant owns those two homes, property to the right. So applicant owns property at 1506 New Jersey Avenue. He's current on taxes and has no open code cases. The appraised value of 1504 North Jersey is $130 with a $5 estimated tax. The last yard extension is 1716 North 25th. 1706 is the applicant's address. Current on taxes, no open cases. Appraised value is $340, potential tax is $7. With those four properties, the total is $317 in new taxes estimated. So then we want to move on to the advisory board voted to forward to full commission for final approval of the following property. Mark O'Brien, 1602, 10, 18, 24, 30, and 29 Bethany. Netherlands LLC, and Leslie Galloway. So there's Mark O'Brien's properties right there. There's four properties.
It is the hillside.
Is Mark O'Brien here tonight?
Yes.
Yes, he is.
Could you approach the podium, please? I'm glad someone wants these properties, but is this some kind of a Good Samaritan project of yours to maintain these, or do you have some long-range goal here?
I've actually got a long-range goal. Yard extension to extend the arable agricultural capabilities of where I live. My folks moved in 1941, and I've been there since I was born. And when I was a child, I can remember asparagus beds growing and a full garden. But over the past 50 years, the overgrowth is such that there's hardly any light down there. So what I'd like to do is take out some of the larger trees and let the native grasses take over and possibly put in some fruit trees, possibly grapevines. Just basically an extension of my yard. But it's like a rainforest down there in the summertime.
Commissioner McGee?
Thank you. Mr. O'Brien, I'm having a hard time picturing you live in this area.
Yes, adjoining to the right, that is actually double of what I'm requesting.
Are you the one that lives across the street from your parents?
No, that would be the Tuckers.
Okay.
I live at 1640, just to the right of what's highlighted.
Can you show me where that is,
Okay.
Charles? It's the white box. He's got it.
Yeah, that's 3.5 acres there, and there's another 2 acres that I'm requesting, and
And what street do you take to get to your house?
Baltimore.
Is that the one? Are you at the bottom where the?
I'm on the
you're
dead
at,
end.
You're at the bottom of like a, and there's hills all around. you.
Correct.
And you have the little wooden bridge that you cross over,
That's across the street.
but it's
Yeah,
your
well,
neighborhood.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay. Oh, good. Yeah, I know where you're at. Thank you.
Are there any further questions for Mr. O'Brien? Okay, thank you, Mr. O'Brien.
Is that a platted street that divides those parcels, or?
No,
It exi-
it's all wooded.
Okay.
You know, Commissioners, I think at agenda review, there was a discussion on this, and maybe to kind of backstep just a little bit, there was some discussion about maybe having some different internal UG departments review properties. So as I remember the discussion on this in particular, and you can almost see by just looking at it, there are some major issues with the terrain here. And one of the concerns was, should we have, it would probably be a good idea to have Public Works or someone review if the applicant is going to remove a lot of trees, does that change the stability of the ground? And what long-term effects may it possibly have? And so in advance, these items had already appeared on the agenda. And so we think in general that's a good idea, and we should add that as a process as we're reviewing applicants. And then short of maybe having a moratorium on land bank applications until we define what the new process is, it's probably a point of discussion still here. And I certainly don't speak for Public Works. I'm looking over at Melissa because I think she probably recalls the conversation.
Yeah, and in fact, I was supposed to have heard back from our Public Works staff on this, but it was pretty short notice. There was some concern about how much removal and of what on this hillside, and so I do believe it would behoove us to let staff look at this before it goes any further. It's seemingly it seemed like a benign request if you just look at from an aerial, but if you know the topography in the area, that's where the concern comes in, and it could have impacts on other adjacent properties if not done properly.
Commissioner?
Thanks. So I understand that you're concerned, but I do know this area that Mr. O'Brien is talking about. In fact, I've been right to the front part of his house. Him and I think there's maybe 1 or 2 neighbors max within a very long range of each other. Keep some of the most immaculate property I've ever seen. I don't know if you all have been to where this is actually at, where Mr. O'Brien lives. It's amazing. It sits at the bottom, and then all around them are just hills that go straight up. They sit at the bottom, and they have built their own little bridge. It's one of the nicest, older, smaller properties we have in my district. I'm not as concerned, but I bet Mr. O'Brien would be more than happy to work with our engineering department if there are some concerns, because I'm sure he doesn't want anything to happen to his property.
I would agree, and I was looking at Mr. Slaughter's notes on the review of it. And, I think the concern was, if I recall correctly, that Rob Richardson, the planning director, had stated, you know, removing trees brings up a variety of issues and possibilities. Are you just cutting them down? Are you using a bulldozer to clear them out? And just kind of that unknown, but knowing the topography of the area made for a possible hesitation, or maybe amending this approval and requiring interaction with Public Works prior to doing any of the tree removal. Maybe that's a stipulation we could add to this to keep it advancing.
So, Mr. O'Brien, so that you can move forward with your project that you want to do you have any objections to us making a special amendment to that you'll meet with Public Works?
Absolutely.
Okay, just to make sure it's safe.
I'd be happy to answer any questions.
That's fine. I mean, none of us up here are engineers. So I think if you're willing to work with Public Works as you work forward, that's all we're really asking
Okay.
for. So do you need are we motioning this, or are we going through the list?
break
first?
these into chunks or take the whole?
We can break them into chunks.
You want me to-
Because we at least take this one in chunks, because we're gonna have to add the special stipulation to it.
Because we've talked about the 4-yard extensions. We could take those and then move into his.
All right.
Okay, so I'll motion for, we're gonna back up a little bit. So I'm gonna make a motion to approve the 4-yard extensions.
Second.
All right, would the clerk read the roll?
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Then I'm gonna make a motion to approve Mr. O'Brien's request for the property in the South 11th Street area with the amendment that before he proceeds with any tree removal, and he'll go over his plan with our Public Works Department.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call, Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Okay.
Commissioner, sorry for being late, but just for my clarification, did you want this meeting to happen before the final approval, or
No.
just sometime before the property was actually transferred over?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Actually, the way I understood it was before he cleared any trees, he was
Yeah.
going to talk. Not, we didn't want to hold up transfer.
Yeah.
Okay, so this stipulation is only if the trees are going to be removed or stuff?
Right.
Okay.
Correct.
All right, moving on.
So, the advisory board voted to not recommend forwarding to commission this small property. You want to talk anything about this?
I'm sorry, what?
That,
We're on the Early Street.
we are moving on to the Neverland, the Early Street, South A Street, Shawnee Drive properties as located, or shown on the picture right there. The main block of property there with the arrows is the land bank property in question. And there's 2 properties listed by the applicant there that are in the blue arrows to the kind of bottom right. If you want to go to the next slide. Just some basic information. You've probably seen some of this information on some of the others. I went ahead and took the total value of all the properties, which is a little bit over $15,000 with the current mill levy. You're looking at roughly about $315 into our coffers each year with the purchase of these properties. The applicant has explained to me that there will be some possible thinning of existing trees, mainly to use this as for recreational use. I'll just leave it at that in case there's any more questions. I believe the applicant is present for questions as well.
Well, we're gonna have, what kind of paintball? 3-wheelers?
No, actually, kind of my initial plan is, I'm very involved with the Boy Scouts.
Could you just, for the record, state your name?
Yes, I'm Bob Deal.
And your
And,
address?
and my address is 1860 South 8th Street.
You live there?
I do. So with the property that I already have, and I don't know if you want to go back a screen, if this is helpful.
Yeah, please.
In the, to the right of the big red piece of land, I own a couple of the properties around the cul-de-sac. And so one of the things that I've been working on this spring, I'm very fortunate to have some friends that have some skid loaders and bobcats and da-da-da, so they have lent me some of their, but I've cleared off kind of one area that I intend to use, for our troop to have a campsite, da-da-da. And I'd like to just kind of make some trails back through there, through the rest of the property, just kind of, the land bank owns it, I own the contiguous property. It just kind of seems to, make sense to see what I can do to kind of make a fun little area for a little campground, make trails back through there, do some, I'm a big gardener, do some gardening, but there's a lot of rubbish that, has been there for decades, that I'd like to remove and clean up and thin out. There's a lot of volunteer trees and there's a lot of dead trees. I'd like to just be able to clear that out and, make it look nicer for the area.
So, staff, do we have access to Google Earth? Yeah.
I think the answer was maybe.
So, Mr. Deal, I'll be really direct with you, and I may have had the wrong address.
Okay.
I spoke with Mr. Slaughter about this request specifically, and when I drove out to what I thought was your address, which I may have gotten wrong, I'm admitting that.
That's fine.
It looked to be an abandoned house.
No.
Yeah, so I must have the wrong address is why I'm asking.
It's possible. I will add, I just bought the house in December of 2014.
Uh-huh.
And when I purchased it, the person I purchased it from had started renovation. He basically had gutted the house, done a lot of, he did spray foam, did some really high-end finish, but he didn't finish it. And so I bought it, I purchased it from him, and I'm still in the process of renovating it. I live there. But for example, the front door has a piece of plywood on it. And the reason I haven't replaced the door yet because it was winter, and I'm going to replace the door, not just repair and put glass in it. So that may be why it appeared abandoned, because there is a
No,
piece of
because-
plywood on that front door. And I don't use that door as my front door. There's another side door that's,
There was nothing about this house that had high-end
oh,
finishes
okay,
on it.
okay. Well, then it must have been a different house.
Yeah, and it appeared to have a lot of cut-up logs in front of it.
That's it. I just had the trees trimmed. I just had the trees trimmed all around the house.
It looked like a lot of large trees were taken down and the logs were just sort of stacked up.
I mean, there's some logs, but it's probably an area, it was probably about right at the front porch, about 12 feet wide. And I mean, it wasn't a very tall, it's not a very tall stack.
So,
I've left those there because that house wasn't being lived in for a long time. What people were doing is they were driving in the driveway and going all the way around through the yard to the Early Street, because there's another entrance off of Early. And people had been driving back through there. So I left those logs right there at that driveway so people would stop doing that, because it looked like
so can we see that address? It's 1860, what'd you say?
South 8th Street.
South 8th Street. Can we see the front of that?
Tim, it's 1860. 60, yeah.
Yeah. It's just, there you go.
Just double click on the red thing and it'll bring
Yeah.
up the street view.
You can see how all those trees are covering the house. I just had all those trees
you
around the
take-
house trimmed out.
Can you, yes, thank you. Drag the man to the road.
That helps.
Well, that's the same picture I'm looking at here, and it's not very.
It's really, you can't see, it would be to the right, but the front of the house drops off and the house next door, my driveway runs in front of the house next door.
Is that it right there?
That's not it.
Okay,
That's-
that's the house I thought was yours.
Oh, you know what?
That frightened me.
I
so-
got you. I rarely drive down that way, so I didn't even notice that. No, that's not my house. My
Okay.
house is up the hill.
Okay, well, I saw no other house on this really wooded, windy road, so I have not, I've seen only this property.
Yeah, so my house, I don't know if you noticed that steep cliff right there. If you were to go to the right there is a pretty steep cliff, and my house is at the top of that cliff. Just maybe 100 yards from that house, but it goes up.
Okay, Tim, just work the other way.
So it's right across the street from here. There you go. So if you
I
go up
bel-
to the left,
I believe this is the house.
that's
right
my
here.
house.
And if I can add, I did drive out there, and I did still notice that there was some boarded windows, I think a boarded door.
Wait a minute.
And
Wait a
actually,
minute.
I was wrong. It's not this one.
It's
You
not
go
that-
further past this, it's gonna be back here in these trees.
Yeah.
But I think that's a concern I still have too, is,
Yeah.
is that Mr. Dills had this property since the end of 14. And look, I understand renovations take time, but now we're talking about also the steward of land. He also mentioned the topography of the land once you get to the south of this area here. And I think it's just questions that, or I should say concerns.
So Mike Tobin is our Director of Public Works. Can you come forward, Mike? You had some comments about this property.
Good evening, Commissioners. Yes, this particular hillside that we're talking about, that's up for discussion right here, was part of an engineering study that was done a long time ago. And before there's a property transfer here, it really should be noted that this hillside is moving,
Right.
and that it's moving to the north. It's collapsed before twice, where we've had to spend substantial money to clean it up.
So, Mr. Deal, I'm the commissioner for this district.
Okay.
Okay, so I'm
Yeah.
your commissioner.
Great.
So I'll take full responsibility for
Awesome,
this.
no problem.
So, I think your motivation and intentions are good, but I admit, I agree with staff that I'm concerned that you've owned this house for a long time and not a lot of progress has been made. So I would tell you for tonight, from my perspective as the third district commissioner, I would like to see you wait on this. We've had it in the land bank a long time. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere anytime soon. And maybe when you make a little more progress with your renovation and we see what the final product's gonna be, you can come back in front of us at that time. And then that'll give Public Works some time to do some engineering and see what can actually happen.
And can I ask that question about the land to the north? What you're talking about and maybe we can go back a slide and he could point out what exactly is happening. If we can go back to an aerial.
Tim, you go back to the PowerPoint.
Yeah, just go back to the topography with
Yeah.
the red highlights.
Sure, so I think what might be easier for you and for our engineering team, Mike Tobin is the director of that team, and I think what would work great is if we sort of table this for
Okay.
tonight.
That's fine.
And you meet with Mr. Tobin and his engineering staff, you look it over, you make some progress on your renovation. You're welcome to call me personally.
Okay.
I think I have a card with me I can give you.
Great.
And then I think you'll be fine.
Yeah, okay. That
Okay.
sounds fine. I
All right.
appreciate your time.
I don't, like I said, I think you're gonna be fine too. I don't think it's gonna go anywhere
Okay. That sounds-
anytime fast.
Yeah, that sounds great.
Okay?
I'm totally good with that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Deal. So I have to deny, my motion is to deny this application.
Second.
All right, we have a motion and second to deny the application at this time. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call, Walters,
Aye.
Regia, Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Okay, moving on, we have a property acquisition at 6918 Sloan.
Correct. Yes, Commissioner, the advisory board voted to forward this to commission for final approval.
Okay, it says they want to place a camper on it. I have trouble sometimes determining, is there is an improved surface on there?
No, there is not. You have some grass right here. You have a bunch of trees. It does drop off. As you can see, there's slope here. I believe the camper may be right here in this picture. I don't know how old this picture is, but I did drive out there. It is a dead end. This is the applicant's house, and then, of course, this is the property in question. But the request is to improve that so they can put the camper there on that property.
Are you saying that they understand it has to have an improved surface to park the camper on?
Yes, I've relayed that.
Can't just park it on the
information.
grass forever?
Correct.
Okay.
But currently, when I went out there, it was parked on the street, basically at the dead end.
All right.
And I believe Ms. Galloway is present if there's any questions.
That was my only question. Any questions from any of the commissioners? The advisory committee recommended approval?
Correct.
Yes.
Should be the part of this presentation after this slide.
Is there a motion to approve?
So moved.
Second?
A motion and second. Clerk, please call the roll.
Roll call, Walters,
Aye.
Regia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
Next, we have a best and final for 407 Cleveland between Trinity AME Church and Benjamin Carruthers. Outlined is the property, and we have referenced Mr. Carruthers' property is the house to the west. Some information on the applicants.
I'm sorry, Chris, could you back up, please? His is the, oh, right there. Thank you. I see the label.
Trinity should all be familiar. They're working on development plan. I've also added this because they were the ones that did request that this delinquent property go into the tax sale. It was in last December's tax sale. This was going to be approved, and then we pulled it at the commission meeting back in March. The other applicant, Benjamin Carruthers, he's wanting the property for yard extension. He does own the property at 411 Cleveland. It's been in his family for some time. He claims he's been maintaining the property, cleaning the property. And the advisory board has recommended for moving forward the application from 411 Cleveland for yard extension.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, I have a question about this best and final. And my question dealt with the issue of money. For some reason, I was expecting to see that there was a dollar proposal from both of the applicants.
Commissioner, those submissions have been sent and received by our office. The deadline was Friday, this past Friday at noon, so I didn't get a chance to put them on the PowerPoint as I wasn't in the office today. So I can read what each applicant is proposing, if you'd like.
Yes, please.
And I believe both applicants are here too to answer any questions. The bid amount offered from Trinity is $500.50. The bid amount offered for Mr. Carruthers is $1,000.
Okay. Well, as to the money, there's a clear preference, but I would say that I know the Carruthers family intends to keep the property up, and it is to the east of a residence that is there that is family owned. So I would move that the property at 407 Cleveland be awarded to Mr. Benjamin Carruthers, subject to his application for yard extension.
Second.
Okay, we have a motion and second that the property be awarded to Mr. Benjamin Carruthers. Would the clerk please read the roll?
Roll call. Walters.
Aye.
Regia.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Motion carries, so congratulations, Mr. Carruthers. Next are the basic.
Next we have some transfers. Got a little history on this. This is for basically Mount Carmel Church. Back in July of 2013, we had an agreement with the church that we would take delinquent property that they own, move them into the land bank. We would hold them in exchange for them to maintain the property. That agreement will expire July 3rd of this year, and we're currently working on a new agreement, and we hope to have that before next month before you guys. So what we're here tonight is there are some of the current list, there's some that are requesting to go back to the church. This list here, there's, I believe, 13 that are being requested to go back to the church. Up bolded at the top, it'll go back to Mount Carmel Church of God in Christ. And then we have 1944, 1948 North 11th that is requested to be transferred back to Mount Carmel Redevelopment Corporation Incorporated to build 2 single-family homes in partnership with our Community Development Department. And I did have a map here. Anything in the blue is the first list, and then the 2 in yellow are the last 2 requested that will have the single-family properties.
Commissioner?
So do they have funding from our community development office? Have they been awarded funding?
I know. I spoke with community development staff today, and it's home dollars to build. Home dollar.
So,
What do you mean by that?
Home dollars is community development HUD money that will build vertically.
yeah, but don't they have to apply for that?
Well, the way that I understand it from community development staff, they want to break ground by June 1st, and they will build it, and then they already have applicants in the queue to apply for it.
Wait, Charles.
It's different than the CDBG
Right,
dollars.
it's
It's the
different.
home funding, so I'm not sure exactly how that works, but I do know that it's not CDBG like the other ones we've been working on. So this is home funding, and,
So they just cut a deal with community development for home money? and then
I don't know, I don't
on the
understand
side
it.
with no public process?
Yeah, I think it's a CHODO, yeah.
But who picks the CHODO?
That's part of it. It's part of the annual action plan, I believe it's outlined.
Well, I don't recall seeing anything about Mount Carmel being the recipient of the home dollars other than a specific amount being allocated to them, to that fund, home dollars.
Right.
Did I miss that in the budget? You tell me it's in the budget that where we agreed to allocate this money to them?
I can find out for you, Commissioner. I mean,
I,
talking with staff on this briefly on the two homes, you know, they are,
I don't know what my fellow commissioners want to do, and I have no problem with Mount Carmel building houses and giving this property, but we don't have enough information to make an intelligent decision.
Commissioner, I will add that through an email correspondence with the home program supervisor, Stephanie Moore, she does state that, yes, they are partnering with them. So, you know, that was good enough reason for me, I think, to bring it forward, was confirmation from their own program coordinator that, you know, I assumed everything was in place. So, again, I think there is a deadline that needs to be met, and that's kind of why they're here this month for consideration.
I think it is different because they are a Chodo, as Marlon was saying, and this is not an area that I've delved into as much as CDBG, so I have tried to contact Ms. Miller, but
So
I
we have
didn't
nobody
realize
from
there was an
CDBG
issue.
here tonight, Melissa?
No, because I didn't see this as was an issue, at least on these two properties, so.
Yeah,
Commissioner?
thank you. So I think Mount Carmel does a great job also, and I don't have any objection to them building homes or even getting home money. It's just I'm a little bit shocked because this summer it was a major deal about following process and having a very public process for distributing home and CDBG funds and funds through community development. And then I just was unaware of this, and now sort of what I'm hearing is that staff decides who receives that funding and that it doesn't come through the commission again, which I don't really know how I feel about that, but it just is very contrary to what went on this summer. But
Is anybody from Mount Carmel here?
I don't believe so. I think there was some scheduling conflicts that was going to prevent them from being here.
You know, I'll speak for myself. If you're gonna come up here and ask us to give you property and you don't bother to show up, then I'm not gonna vote to give you property. I mean, come on. We don't have any of the answers to any of the questions we want here tonight. And we're supposed to vote on this because we're told they've got a June 1st deadline?
it's, Commissioner, it's not.
This is a hot button item with some of the commissioners because of the CDBG and the way it was dealt with this summer. And I don't have any problem if everything is copacetic, but I don't like the idea of just giving out property, giving out home funds, and nobody being able to tell me one thing about how this occurred. It's just not right. I'm not gonna vote for it. I'm moved to, I don't know, send this back, table this until the meeting of, next month's meeting.
For clarification, are you tabling all of the requests
No,
or
just
just those
those two.
two?
second,
Okay, we have a motion and second.
Roll call, Walters,
Aye.
Regia,
aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Okay, as far as the transfers from the land bank to the,
Commissioner, I'm sorry, I did just receive a message from Ms. Miller. I'm sorry, I did the best I could. I didn't realize this was a controversial matter. She says that Mount Carmel, 2 houses, home funds, and the home proceeds are from sales of houses. So it's it's a revolving fund
Yeah.
of some sort. So that's all I can tell you at this point.
I understand that part. I know that much about home money. What I care about is the process in which that money is distributed. Does everyone that is a Chodo in the county have fair access to this money? Was it publicized? Did everyone have the opportunity to apply for this money? Or did staff just say on their own, behind closed doors, hey, we're gonna give this money to Mount Carmel? Again, I'm with Commissioner Walker. I don't have any objections to Mount Carmel receiving this money, but I do remember this summer, Mount Carmel is one of the organizations that complained and wrote a letter to the mayor complaining that they were unaware of the application process for CDBG money. So I just find that a little bit concerning since nobody seems to know what the public application process is for this money. I just think, you know, the money should be available to everyone, for everyone to apply for.
Well, we'll find out.
All right, we've had
Motion and second.
a motion and second to approve the transfers, excluding the ones to the redevelopment corporation. Would you read the roll, please?
I'm not sure I got that motion.
Okay, who made the motion? You made.
You made the one on the Mount Carmel
That's on
property.
those two properties.
Yeah.
Now we have the transfers
Now the
to,
other transfers, just the transfer.
to the church, Mount Carmel Church.
Do we have a motion? I'll make the motion to approve.
Second?
Okay, please call the roll.
Roll call, Walters,
Aye.
Regia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye. Final item on land bank seems to be transfers to the land bank. There is a list in your substantial list. How many? 303 properties that I assume were tax sale unpurchased.
Well, this is the remainders of the list we started back in January of or
Okay.
December of 14. We were asked to just get the rest of them on the list. There may be more coming. The way I look at it is once we get them on and get these taxes abated, I'll run some more lists just to make sure there's not a couple extra stragglers out there.
Move to approve the list as submitted.
Second?
Okay, we have motion and second. Please read the roll.
Roll call, Walters,
Aye.
Regia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
McKiernan,
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
So, Chris, I just wanted to tell you, great job in getting the land bank organized and cleaned up in that last motion that we made. I really appreciate all your effort in that.
Item 2 on the agenda tonight is a discussion of the Land Bank Advisory Board. I'd like to say that we'll conclude this by 6 so we can start the next meeting. Well,
Sure.
I don't see any reason to belabor it. Go ahead.
I'll just start by saying we've had this discussion before. I believe a couple months ago I did a presentation on it, and this was kind of a request by the mayor to have, I think, a discussion on maybe more in line of what you guys wanted to see the involvement of the Land Bank Advisory Board be. I think there was some suggestions of comparing it to maybe what planning and zoning goes through. Does it need to be that complicated? I don't have a recommendation at this time. I just wanted to open it up to get some discussion from you guys on this matter.
Commissioner McKiernan.
His definite opinion.
Well, I've said this before, and I said this in one of our commission meetings, is that, and I'm not sure that everybody necessarily agrees with me, but I do see some sort of an analog between the Planning Commission and the Land Bank Advisory Board, in that they are first pass, they vet the applications, they know some of the properties, they know some of the areas, they can create a recommendation that then comes forward to us as the Land Bank Board of Commissioners. And then just as we do with Planning Commission, we can then, as a commission, either uphold or overturn the recommendations as brought forward by the Land Bank Advisory Board. Because there's a lot of, the grassroots membership of that advisory board, I think, is valuable in that it gives us a street level view and may uncover, as part of the vetting process, some things that we're unaware of in terms of the dynamic of a property, the history of a property, the potential impact of a property. But ultimately, as I understand the whole organization, it is the Land Bank Board of Commissioners, which is the Board of Commissioners, which would make the final decision based on a recommendation from the advisory board. So that's just kind of how I see it going.
Chris?
I have no issue with retaining an advisory board. I think citizen input is good. I mean, obviously, it's only as good as the people we appoint to the board. And if we don't make selections that are interested, then the board is not going to produce much in the way of thoughtful decision making. But I still believe that as many people involved in government as possible, the better. And I'm in favor of basically maybe we fine tune it in ways about criteria or. But otherwise, I don't want to change it. Commissioner?
Mr. Chairman?
Okay, Commissioner Townsend, then Commissioner Murguia.
Oh, thank you. It's hard to see I'm working with a delay here. I agree with the comments already expressed by Commissioner McKiernan about the relationship. I agree with your comments, Mr. Chairman, that the advisory board plays a central role, an essential function in helping identify what's good or what may be less than good about certain real estate transactions from the land bank. The comment, though, that I have often heard expressed by some members of the advisory board is that they would like to have available to them more information, and by that I mean the types of information that comes to us as the standing committee about the nature of the request. So to that extent, that would be the only thing I would offer. Thank you.
So, Chris, do you have any concerns or comments you'd like to make about as far as how you feel about the advisory board and how they are to work with, since you're the one that has to work with them on these land bank lots?
First off, let me just say they do a great job. The advisory board is an important part of what the land bank process is. And for most part, I think we get along good. We are starting to provide more information to them, as I've heard those requests as well. From the land bank perspective, and again, we don't have any recommendations, but I think there's going to be some scenarios where we definitely need that eyes and ears on the street advice. And there's going to be some projects come forward that maybe their input's going to be important, but it's only going to we're going to also need to get maybe some subject matter expert advice on it too. We did rewrite the policy to include some members of staff to be part of that. I think I've always said having staff involved in the land bank process keeps us all on the same page. Instead of turning around and disposing of some property, whether it's for a side yard or a garden or just for someone wants to keep it up because we can't maintain it. I've been told, why did you let go of that 6 months ago? Well, I didn't know you guys were working on that project. So I think that's something we should look at. Again, it's an important role. I think it's just a matter of maybe further defining what that role is, further defining, do we keep it in the current structure it is? Are there other recommendations to be made? Maybe. I will say we're one of the few land banks in the country that allows citizens to have this kind of input in the process. Most of the land bank advisory boards, or citizen advisory boards as they're called, are just advocates for the land bank. Hey, we're rolling out a new Adopt-A-Lot program. Please spread the word to your constituents and your neighbors and all that stuff. So we are probably a little bit above and beyond the national curve, and that might be the right way to go, or maybe we can fine-tune it some more. I've done some research on this, but just tonight I just wanted to get more of your guys' input on this.
So I didn't hear, Chris, I didn't hear anything that you said that is alarming to me or concerning at all. I think it sounds like you want some more professional discretion, sometimes about what goes in front of the advisory board because it's more complicated and you'd like to utilize staff's recommendation. So from my perspective, I would tell you, sort of draft something and bring it forward if my fellow commissioners are supportive of that. I mean, surely don't want to waste your time, but I can see, like what we went over tonight, why residents wouldn't necessarily be the most knowledgeable of the terrain of the land or underground springs or moving hillsides, you know, so that's why relying on staff would be nice and not having to go through that process. But that would be my input to you. You'd have to ask the other commissioners.
Commissioner McKiernan?
Now, having said earlier that I really value the appointment of citizens to the advisory board, you and I have had discussions before, and I totally agree with Commissioner Murguia. We've had discussions where sometimes it takes someone with more expertise than the citizens who are part of that board in terms of economic development potential, in terms of public works potential for good or for bad, as we've talked about tonight with the hillside. So if it takes involvement of other staff within the UG, that's great. If we want to consider recruiting other community members of this board to supplement the neighborhood leaders who are already on the board and to supplement staff, then I'd be open to that as well. Because we've talked several times about strategic assemblage of land for future development and evaluating certain parcels in the larger scope. Well, okay, it's right next door to a house. It could be a yard extension, but it could also be part of something else. I think that's where we need to provide you some additional support and counsel. And if that comes from inside the UG, great. If we need to consider recruiting some other folks with expertise, then I'd be very open to that as well.
Thank you.
Anything further tonight? I'm sorry? No? All right. There being nothing further on our agenda, I will adjourn the committee hearing and turn it over to Mr. McKiernan.
Tell you what, let's do. In let's shoot for 6 o'clock straight up to start economic development and finance. That'll give us a chance to make a couple of switchovers here and be ready to go at 6 o'clock for economic development and finance. Settle down,
My son stayed longer than that.
and we can get this meeting started.
I made a few notes on why I figured some of the revenues came in or why they did and why some
Yes, we do. Or an air horn.
see.
All right, there we go.
You be as efficient as I was, and we'll be out of here in time for the meeting.
And then,
I don't know.
here,
So we'd like to welcome everyone to this meeting of the Economic Development and Finance Standing Committee. Public comment is welcome on any item that is up for discussion by the committee. If any member of the audience wishes to make a comment about any item that the committee is discussing, be recognized by myself or another member of the committee. You can come to the podium in the middle of the room, and you'll have 3 minutes to make your comments. Once again, we do ask that anyone who speaks tonight before the committee speak as directly as possible into a microphone for accurate recording and for broadcast purposes. Let's go ahead and take the roll call, please.
Roll call, Alvey,
Here?
Walters,
Here.
Murgia. Here. Townsend,
Here.
Walker,
Here.
McKiernan.
Here. First of all, we do have 2 revisions to tonight's agenda. Just want to make sure everybody got the blue sheet. We have a 5th item added to our committee agenda, and then we have a new item number 1 under public agenda. So those will come at the end of the items that were on the initial agenda that was distributed. Next item on the agenda is approval of our minutes from the meeting of March 7th.
move for approval?
Second.
It's been moved and seconded to approve those minutes as submitted. All in favor say aye.
Aye.
All opposed say no. Those minutes are approved as submitted. Takes us to our committee agenda. Item number 1 is our first quarter report from Finance.
Good evening, commissioners and committee members. We'll start with the first quarter investment report. As you'll see on the cover summary page, our total investments are total $162 million, and 24% of them are invested on within our own checking accounts, so they're available to meet our liquid needs. We have 65% of the total portfolio invested in certificates of deposit with various local banks, and the remainder is 11% invested in various treasuries and agency notes. The total average yield that we're currently earning is around 86 basis points, or 86.86%, less than 1%. That's typical for localities over the past 5 or 6 years because of our low interest rate environment. The average rate of maturity is about 1.5 years. And also included, you'll find the individual investments and a list of them and when their maturities are and accrued interest for each. I plan in the next quarterly meeting, you'll be receiving an investment report that has a little bit more detail and better, kind of summary information, so look forward to that. All right. The next quarterly report is the budget to actual report. And I'm glad that the commission has an opportunity to review this report on a quarterly basis. In the future meeting, I hope to incorporate how individual departments within the general fund are performing. So it's good to take a look at the financial performance of the departments throughout the fiscal year to make sure they are meeting the budget targets. So if we go to the first page, I'm just going to go directly to the general fund since it's so sizable, the consolidated general fund. As you can see overall, and on the bottom line for revenues, we've thus far collected $61 million out of the $201 million expected to be collected for this given fiscal year through the first 3 months of the year. And that amounts to 30% of the total. If you were to do a straight line quarterly percentage that would be 25%. So we're up about 5% overall. That's only because the way we collect property tax, we only receive, well, we collect property tax 2 or 3 times a year. The biggest distribution is at the beginning of the year. So as you can see, property tax and delinquent taxes are in at roughly 57% and 53% of the total projected to be received this year. So we're a little higher. Going down, you'll see that sales and use tax budgeted at 36 million. Thus far, we've collected 9.1. So that's a little bit up. We're holding steady. So we've collected about 25% of what we expected. My guess is that sales tax collections during the summer goes up a bit, so we have that to look forward to. Charges for services vary throughout the year depending on demand for those services. Other governmental revenues, you see, well, it's not very much money, but that sort of depends on when we receive the money from the various grants. So overall, those are my comments on the revenue side. On the expenditure side, we're exactly at where we ought to be. 24.8% of our budget has been expended thus far. And
Why is Capers 40% paid already in the first quarter?
Those include penalties that are paid to Capers
All right.
for retirements.
Could you comment on the county general fund, 34% expenditure? Is that a timing issue or?
the county.
Is that for Capers also?
No, this is on the first sheet. About the third line down has, fourth line down, general fund county.
Are you looking at?
Oh, he's looking at this sheet here.
Looking at this.
Well, but those same numbers are on the county general fund, budget to actual. They're the same totals.
Yeah, budget to actual is what I'm looking at.
Yeah, he's looking at this sheet right here. So you're in the, no, that 34%, that's with respect to the bond and interest city fund. The general fund county is at 18.9%, the one right below it. The fourth one down.
So,
Let me show you what I'm looking at.
Because I see the same thing. Which was
General fund
this one
county.
here, this one. Well, he's
Yeah,
looking,
it's that
so
one.
these numbers,
Oh.
45.9
It's the
and
fourth one.
35.3, that's the county general fund.
Oh,
These-
so,
It's the opposite.
so your spreadsheet slipped a cell or something? General fund county.
34% on the expenditure side?
yeah, there's something in others at 98%. And I can't
yeah,
say
you're
right
right.
off what other is right now.
Okay.
Under contractual services.
So I'm gonna assume that's just a timing or a one-time thing that isn't gonna continue or something maybe?
Well, whatever was budgeted in the category for other contractual services is 100% spent for the most
Okay.
part, so. And we can look it up and see it. I'm happy to walk through each one, city, county, rather than just talk about the consolidated.
I think I'd just ask if anybody has any questions other than what Commissioner Walters had. I have two. It's just a couple of things that I'm just curious about. If we go back to the initial revenues and expenditures, your very first, your cover page,
Oh, okay.
it just struck me under other funds that sewer system is only 15% of budget at the 25%. That was one of the ones that just kind of jumped out at me because it's a large dollar fund, and I assume that is, are those the fees that we collect for the purpose? If you look under other funds, about two-thirds of the way down, sewer system budgeted 33.7, collected 4.9.
Yeah.
Just curious if there was a reason we're behind on that.
We're assuming it's a timing issue.
Okay.
We'll find out for you.
That would be great. And the only other thing that jumped out at me, how ironic I have Mr. Alvey sitting next to me here. The only other thing that jumped out at me on the consolidated general, or on the city general, either one, was the BPU pilot was 14.9% of budget at the 25% mark. And again, that's a fairly large dollar line, so that low percentage ends up turning into more dollars.
Well, that's also a timing
Timing,
issue.
okay.
Yeah, because that amount's allocated, on a monthly basis and,
Okay,
or,
great.
So there is one thing, the first quarter is well, especially on the revenue side, the first quarter is a little bit tricky because we have accruals that we enter as part of the year-end audit, and so some of the transactions that were for billings that occurred in the prior fiscal year but were received in the future fiscal year, those have to be brought back to the prior fiscal year. So there's a little bit of a timing issue. It all flushes out the further along you get into the year.
Okay. But if we look,
Yeah.
my bottom line appears to be that if we look at all funds, we are ahead on revenue, ahead of the 25% mark on revenue, behind the 25% mark on expenditures, so we're ahead for the year to date.
Yep, that's true, yeah.
Any other questions or comments? Really appreciate the report. Always good to look and just see how we're doing, and it's nice to know for the first quarter we're ahead.
Oh, there's one other piece here.
Yes.
The next report is the budget revisions, $10,000 and over for the first quarter. There were 5 transactions during the quarter. 2 of those were approved by the commission, which were the first 2. The first one was $750,000 that was added to the employee health fund from the county general fund, and that was approved by the commission on January 29th. Then the second one was the 2016 countywide citizen survey that was approved last year by the commission, and we did the budget revision this past quarter for $100,000, and the funds came from both the city and the county general fund. And the other 3 budget revisions came from contingencies, one being an improvement grant issue that was reallocated from 2015 to 2016 for economic development, and the next one for a Kansas Speedway parking lease where the CPI, Consumer Price Index, increased, and then the next one was to move revenue from 2015 for the land bank over into 2016.
Any questions or comments for Mr. Lindsay? It appears that there are none. Thank you very much for the update.
So at your next meeting, we'll be presenting the 2015 year-end financial audit and comprehensive annual financial report, so look for that.
We look forward to that every year.
So I would like to remind you, so that you're not shocked, but at this during this presentation, we'll be talking about the implementation of GASB 68. And that is that's the requirement that we record all of our pension liability on our financial statements, which is on the government-wide statement. So be looking forward to that, because it'll make our statements look quite different.
So recording our unfunded liability will dramatically change the bottom line
It
of our
will,
statement.
Yes, yes. But it will also
Gosh,
change
with
the
a
bottom
teaser like
line.
that, how can we not look forward to June?
I won't tell you how much, yeah. But you should also know that it also changed the bottom line for every other locality in the United States. So everyone's in the same boat.
All right.
Okay.
Thank you so much. Appreciate it. That brings us to item number 2 on our agenda tonight, which is consideration of conducting a public hearing regarding IRBs and a pilot structure. Mr. Brakovich.
Yes, thank you, Commissioner. Good evening. I'm going to ask Brent Miles to come. Oh, maybe.
Hi, Brent. How are you? Good.
You guys all know Brent, right? With Vice President of Development with North Point.
This will be fine.
Sure. And Tim Klink with Polsinelli. Tim, could you put? Thanks. Nope. Wrong one.
Correct.
Yep.
Why don't we just? I'm gonna,
So is-
you know, we're gonna hear this again and again. Tonight, why don't we just simply, I'm gonna make a motion to approve
That's
the
not the one,
resolution.
Second.
All right, so we have a motion and a second to establish the public hearing for May 26th.
Just the public hearing.
And Mr. Brakovich, or Patrick, make sure I understand what we're doing here. So this motion is not only to conduct the public hearing, but also with the intent of adopting the resolution of intent to approve the IRBs and the pilot structure.
Correct. Yes. So we'll just advertise for the public hearing on May 26th. You know, some of our incentives require a resolution to set a public hearing date.
Right.
That's not the case, but we love this project, and we'd love to talk about it as many opportunities as we could get, Commissioner Walker. But with respect to time, I appreciate that. And yeah, you'll hear the full presentation. There's an embedded pilot structure. This deal, though, does contemplate, the development agreement had 2 other incentives structured in, a CID and a TDD. With the large size facility they're building, the TDD would generate a significant amount of annual revenue for what we call the Fairfax Fund for improvements for Fairfax and Kindleberger roads. So, but we'll tell you more about it later.
It is the continuing good development of a great project.
Yep.
So,
You're winning. I would walk away now if I were you.
We'll be back.
My 2
So-
cents is it's a big building.
we have a motion and a second to conduct a public hearing with the intent of adopting a resolution of intent to approve IRBs and a pilot structure for the project now as part of the Racer site redevelopment. Is there any further discussion on that issue? Hearing none. Roll call, please.
Roll call, Alby,
Aye.
Walters,
Aye.
Regia,
Aye.
Townsend,
Aye.
Walker,
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. Thank you so much. We look forward to May 26th. So our,
Yeah. Brian. Yeah, let them go.
okay.
If you would.
All right, so we're going to, I've had a request, sorry, Marlon. I've had a request that we alter the order of presentation of tonight's meeting. We're going to move the public hearing agenda up now because our presenters are still students, and there's these things called finals that they are either in the midst of or about to be in the midst of. So what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and move forward now to our public agenda. We'll put our committee agenda temporarily on hold and come back to item number 3 on that. Item number 1 on the public agenda is a presentation by students from the University of Kansas School of Business to discuss how to position the Argentine neighborhood for business relocation through a tapestry analysis, and I'll be very interested to hear that. And so it appears we have two students and likely a faculty mentor here this evening.
How could you tell?
So gentlemen, what we'll ask you to do is just introduce yourselves, and then we are eager to hear your presentation.
Good evening. My name is Wally Meyer, Director of Entrepreneurship Programs at the University of Kansas.
I'm Ben Tumbleson, senior studying finance, graduating in a week, finals this week. So, thank you.
So we shouldn't stand in the way of finals on the way to graduation.
Exactly.
Okay.
Good evening, I'm Wilson Hack. I'm a junior. I'm studying computer science in the School of Engineering.
Commissioners, we really thank you for this opportunity, and particularly thank you for this opportunity being here. By way of a moment's background, these two students are part of a group of Jayhawk consultants, so named because they're students who are particularly interested in understanding more about solving challenging business problems. And the problems that we typically take up in this out-of-class group are ones that meet two criteria. One, for our clients, they must be significant challenges such that we would expect that our clients would adopt the recommendations as we provide them. And number two is they must provide a significant learning experience, because after all, at KU, education is job one. We were approached some time ago to look at a specific area that this study analyzed with the idea in mind of really trying to provide a perspective on the area's interest and attraction to entities, organizations, businesses that could be, might be interested in and encouraged to move into the area, develop a rationale if one existed for that, and then identify specific targets of opportunity. And if I can say, as their professor, the students have done an extraordinary job. Gentlemen?
Thank you, Wally, for the introduction. So, like Wally just mentioned, we had an opportunity through an engagement from Commissioner Murguia to really look at how do we position the Argentine community for business relocation purposes. So this is a version of that presentation that we had originally given to Commissioner Murguia a few weeks back, and we had the opportunity to come here to share with you guys some of our findings on that. So we wanted to start and kind of talk about our objective and what we were really trying to do here. And it started with how do we provide a compelling argument for businesses that might want to move to the Argentine community. Additionally, we're going to look at some Argentine-specific differentiation elements, so what really makes the Argentine stand out as a community that businesses would want to be in this location. And then finally, we'll look at how do we match compatible businesses into that area. Our presentation will take up three main parts here. I will talk about the first one, which is really from a high level, is we're going to look at what do businesses primarily retail stores look for in site selection. We honed in on 8 primary characteristics that we think are broad and general enough that they apply to a mass market of businesses. And then we ask ourselves, how does Argentine stack up against these? Secondly was a specific request to Commissioner Murguia's request for certain businesses to look at if they might succeed well in the Argentine community. And in the interest of time, we will skip this. However, we're excited about our third one on there, which is all of our research kind of pointed towards one primary recommendation, which is actually well-timed today. So we think we're pretty excited to share that as well. So just a quick background here. Our research and sources were primarily U.S. Census data, as well as Esri GIS mapping. And one of the coolest parts of what we'll touch on a little later in the presentation is data that we derive from a custom tapestry analysis that does come from us from Esri. And this is really, really interesting because it allows us to provide kind of an apples-to-apples comparison, Argentine with other communities. So traditionally, when we look at how certain demographic factors compare, it becomes almost misleading when you compare the Argentine to communities that might have similar demographics when that's not considering socioeconomic characteristics. And that's where this Esri data is incredibly useful, because what they've done is they've taken specific segments of communities in the United States and broken it down a step further than demographics and included those socioeconomic variables. So what you can see on that kind of blue faint map there is all of those kind of darker segments are areas that have similar demographic and socioeconomic elements as the Argentine community. And this is especially exciting because when we compare businesses and we look at how businesses thrive in certain areas, we can actually compare it really truly apples to apples with Argentina. And it helps us show geographic under and overrepresentation of certain businesses. So we'll come back to that a little later in the presentation. So our first module we'd like to talk about is site considerations for business. And we really started by asking ourselves, what do new businesses look for when they set up shop in a new place? So we really wanted to look at what were those factors that influence these decisions, and then see how Argentine kind of fares against them from kind of a high-level qualitative perspective. So we started pretty simply with a very basic model with 8 factors, and we said, where does Argentine fit in with those? So I'd love to walk through each of those factors and kind of understand what a business might look for, and then how Argentine does on kind of a basic level. The first one is very simple. Businesses like regions that have high densities of potential customers, and obviously positive growth trends are desirable. Businesses want to be in areas where people exist. And what we know for Argentina is Argentina is a tight-knit community, and they do have a growing population, which is a good sign. The second one is the distribution of purchasing power. This can kind of take on 2 aspects. So businesses really like areas that consumers have both disposable income for their products as well as income to provide for necessity items. And what we know is that although Argentina might not be an economically strong area when compared to other regions, the surrounding area does provide a strong example for boosts in disposable income figures, which is a strong cue.
Can I ask a question? So when you say the surrounding areas, how far out is that reach?
Excellent question. So we actually have a graphic a little later that's more specific. So these first 8 elements, we're talking about kind of a really qualitative perspective, and some of these we'll actually drill into with actual numbers and actual data. And this is one case where we will have some numbers to support that. The third one looks at accessibility, visibility, and traffic. This is best understood that businesses like to be in visible areas. What we know is that businesses prefer to be visible, have traffic considerations, parking, public transportation available to them, so customers are able to get to their business to see it. And what we know is that Argentina is located between 3 major highways, which has high volumes of traffic as well as visibility. And again, we have data on that a little later. The fourth factor is signing, zoning, and planning. And this one is kind of more high level, but it really comes down to that businesses want to move to areas where the community is willing and able to adapt and really wants them to be in their community. So businesses obviously must consider the financial impact of these expenses in terms of things like lease and rent, the location, and the startup cost. And what we know is that Argentina has always had this pro-business attitude to encourage business relocation. Competition considerations is a bit of an interesting one, and it's kind of twofold. It can be confusing that sometimes you think that a business would want to move into an area where competitors don't exist. However, we find through research that it's more likely that businesses want to relocate to areas where competitors do already exist. That works for 2 reasons. One, because it shows that there is already a demand in that region and somebody has already done the research to prove that demand exists and it has a continuing demand. The second, there's synergies that can be created by multiple businesses being together. This is why shopping districts are so successful. And what we know with Argentina is that there is, in the surrounding area, strong competition for a number of the industries that we looked at in this analysis. The 6th one here is what we call tenant preferences and logistics, and this ties very closely to the signing, zoning, and planning. What we know is that when a business moves into an area where they are having to lease or buy a facility rather than build their own, there become specific tenant considerations, and especially things like curb appeal. We mentioned some factors on there like building maintenance, utilities, lawn care, and security. But that can really be boiled down to businesses want to be in areas where their customers are going to feel safe, where there's a low crime rate. What we know for Argentina is that they've historically stood prepared to provide amenities to businesses wanting to be in these areas. And that we do know that Argentina does have moderate levels of crime, which may deter some niche businesses. The 7th is retail potential, and this is one of the more specific factors. But what we know is that businesses want to be in areas where their products or services are wanted, so to speak. So there are certain products or services that thrive in certain regions in the United States where they might not in others. So what we know is that they favor areas that have above normal demands, and we're excited. What Wilson's going to talk about in a little bit is one specific industry that does have a heightened demand for certain products. And what we know is that Argentine does have a high density of underserved residents who do lack access to some certain industries that we did look at. And then finally is the potential for employees. When businesses move to certain regions, they really have to look at, are we able to accurately staff a force? For some businesses, that might mean a skilled labor force, and for others, it might mean blue-collar work. And in the case for a majority of the industries we look at, that was retail or customer-facing service. And what we know is that Argentine has an immediately deployable workforce who's eager to fill new positions. So if we take all of those factors, we can actually build a case for Argentine on a specific couple data points. So the first one we talked about, which is important, which is visibility. What we know is that Argentine is located between three of the busiest highways in Kansas. All of that visibility is incredibly strong to a business that might want to move to a region where they get strong visibility not only from those within the city, but those driving through. Secondly, we know that Argentine has a workforce that's willing to fill new positions. Esri census data from 2015 told us that the Argentine resident is actually 18% more likely to have looked for a job in the last 30 days. This is from 2015. So what we know is that they have a heightened demand for work, and there is an immediately deployable workforce. And then finally, this goes back to your comment earlier. We know that the average Argentine median household income is actually growing faster than the average area in Kansas and nationally. I know it's difficult to see on the screen here, but there's a faint red hue around the Argentine that extends in a 5-mile radius around. So that 5 miles does touch. Yeah, it's tough to see. I promise it's there. It does touch slightly into the downtown region, but what we know is that when businesses are located in certain regions, it doesn't disqualify them from those who might be outside of that region. So what we know, if you can see on the left there, is that Argentine is actually growing faster, and this region is growing faster than 25% of Kansas and 32% faster than U.S. average. And this comes to us as an extension of our Esri analysis that we had conducted. So if we put all those together and we qualitatively apply scores, what we know is that Argentine scores actually very, very well on this analysis. And this is interesting in that it can be really easy to write off a city that might not look appealing, from the curb, but everything is deeper than just the cover. And what we know is that Argentine is actually really, really well positioned for business relocation. So with that being said, I'd love to have Wilson talk about where we're going next.
Yeah, thanks, Ben. So he already touched on this just a little bit, but we're actually going to skip this module. What this module looks at is 4 of the 5 specific industries that Commissioner Murguia had requested. We'll show you the list of those, and we do have those slides in the back of the deck in case anybody is really interested in looking at those. But just in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and skip ahead to what was our final conclusion. So these were the 4 that we looked at: hardware stores, auto parts stores, fitness offerings, and convenience stores. Like I said, we're going to skip that. So on to the third module here. All of our research kind of pointed to one final conclusion, and that was that food and restaurant, specifically fast food offerings in Argentine is really a good play, and there's an unmet demand in the Argentine area for food and restaurants. So you might recognize that little blue graph again. We're doing the same apples to apples comparison here, looking at nearly identical regions, and we were able to find that the Argentine area has 30% fewer restaurants and fast food locations than areas just like Argentine in the United States. So this shows that there's an underdeveloped industry here that is fast food and restaurants, and there needs to be somebody to come in to meet this unmet demand. Secondly, over here on the left we have what's called an MPI, and this is something that Esri uses, and they assume that the U.S. average is 100. So if the average U.S. resident, for example, spent $100 and you had an MPI of 125, then you would spend $125. So it's kind of a ratio here. And as you can see, Argentine residents are 40% more likely than the average U.S. resident to visit a fast food restaurant and spend approximately $10, which lends itself to prepared food, fast food locations. And third, this is kind of a graph showing you, it's not totally exhaustive, but just looking at what's there in the surrounding area. And as you probably know, Argentine's kind of centered in the middle of that graph. And there are some big players: Taco Bell, McDonald's, names that everybody would recognize, but there's not really anything in the Argentine area, and that kind of represents a physical gap. But as we've seen, there is demand from the Argentine residents for businesses like this, presenting an opportunity for them to thrive in a location like this. So specifically, we were able to look through the ESRI data and find actual businesses that are best suited for the Argentine residents, instead of just making a high-level conclusion that fast food would be a good approach. So here's the 12 listed, and then this next graph here should allow you to see this a little bit better. Over on the left, CiCi's Pizza has the highest MPI, that same relative ratio that we were talking about, of 173. So they're 73% more likely than the average U.S. resident to visit a CiCi's Pizza. And then all the way down to Wendy's, there's still an 11% higher demand in the Argentine area to visit a Wendy's. So as we presented this to Commissioner Murguia, these were kind of the next steps that we gave to her. I guess this probably wouldn't apply as much to some of the people sitting in this room, but we wanted her to be able to take this deck and use it to effectively sell Argentine to potential players, specifically the ones that we had listed in our presentation. The second point here probably doesn't make much sense, so I'll go into it in a little bit of detail. One of the things we looked at was convenience stores, and we found that Casey's General Store does not derive as much of its revenue from tobacco sales as most convenience stores, and it actually derives quite a bit of its revenue from prepared food. And because prepared food was already something that we'd identified as having heightened demand in the Argentine area, and not relying as much on tobacco sales, Casey's General Store was one of the other strong recommendations we had as somebody to attract to the Argentine area. And then specifically for Ann as well, to be able to go out and redirect and focus her acquisition efforts. Instead of trying to kind of put feelers out, she can definitively say, this is who I want to be going for, and this is who we want in the Argentine area. And then finally, the ultimate goal would be there's some available space in the Argentine area that we think could pretty much be created and developed into a food court, if you will, with several of those large industry players locating in the Argentine area, and creating, if you will, an Argentine shopping center with fast food offerings and prepared food offerings for the Argentine residents. So that's kind of a quick run through of what we've done here. We'd love to open it up for questions and feedback or any concerns that anybody has.
We certainly thank you for your presentation and your work. Comments, questions?
I just think it's a really interesting approach. I'd not heard of tapestry analysis. It gives you some very targeted information, and comparison data is excellent. So good work.
Yeah, it's I'm disappointed we didn't get to it because a number of the other industries we looked at really benefited from that. Traditionally when you look at census data, it's very tough to compare Argentine to Orange County, California. Even if demographics are similar between them, the socioeconomic kind of element that comes into that tapestry report is incredibly useful, and it sells itself, especially when you look at fast food, that we know that it's underdeveloped, not just based on demographics, but based on socioeconomics. So we definitely agree.
So I just wanted to thank these three. They've been great to work with this last semester and create a wealth of information for myself to better represent my district. They sort of downplayed this part probably for my benefit, but I did want to bring something up. Something that would have done particularly well in Argentine, which isn't a good thing, is a smoke shop, because there is a disproportionate amount of tobacco usage in Argentine. So that's the negative side. What I particularly loved about their recommendation is that they knew, because of the work this commission has done in regard to smoking, and that we aren't interested in that, they specifically came up with Casey's, which still meets our demand for convenience store items and for gasoline and things like that, without feeding into that sort of unhealthy tobacco sort of lifestyle. So I was particularly excited about that in particular. So, and I think that that is a great example that the whole reason of this presentation is this is all a great example of other areas east of 635 that could benefit from these kinds of businesses. In particular, it's interesting to know Casey's, you know, is not making most of their revenue from tobacco sales.
And Commissioner, I just wanted to state that I did meet with Ben and Will over the phone and walk through this presentation a few weeks ago when we committed to make sure that they could be available before they graduated or had to take off for the summer. So I apologize that we had to move this through, but I do think that it was good to get them in here before they left town. The other item of note is we have spoken with their professor who's sitting over here tonight and asked that he consider working in other parts of our community, given that there's, I think, quite a few groups that will be clamoring for this level of analysis to feed in with our planning staff and economic development staff as they move forward with the different plans for our community. So.
Well, that is true. We have pretty much an endless supply of future student projects.
We've been dedicated to trying to do what we think is the right, presenting the right corporate responsibility. In that regard, Jayhawk Consulting has worked on 3 or 4 projects with the GM Fairfax facility with Juniper Gardens and a number of other KCK establishments. So if there's a way for KU to, again, live up to what we see as our corporate responsibility, given capacity limitations when we have so many students and so many hours, and they take multiple courses, but we certainly would love to consider it.
Fantastic. It really is great to see students who are out in the community, not just doing something that's abstract in a classroom, but who are engaged in a real-world analysis that leads to real-world solutions. So once again, well done.
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes, I did have a couple of comments and questions about the presentation. I wanted to congratulate those young men on their upcoming graduation from Kansas University and on the presentation made tonight. I had a particular question about how you went about getting the information that led to your analysis on the slide that showed in the Argentine area which restaurants would be most likely to be frequented by the Argentine residents. And as you said, Mr. Chairman, this would be great for other districts to have the opportunity to have a similar analysis done.
Yeah, so I can tackle that. Great question. So I know it's very difficult to see there at the bottom, but the source is actually, so the Esri data source we used had a wealth of information that extended just beyond things you might traditionally find in a census report, and they actually have market analyses for certain industries. And in this case, we looked at, if I can read that correctly, that's the retail market potential for fast food in Argentine. So what Esri has actually done is assessed the variability of these businesses specific to the Argentine. And like Wilson talked about earlier, this uses that same MPI, the Market Potential Index, which looks at 100. So you can see the baseline there is our 100, and then everything above that, which we highlighted in the blue here, is saying these are heightened demands for these specific businesses. So this information was kindly provided from Esri.
Fantastic.
Okay. All right. I was wondering in particular, since we've just recently gotten the results of a city countywide survey, if the compilation of that information was a result of actually going to residents in the district and asking them their preferences.
No, I don't think that was specifically included. We didn't have any of that data, but this is based on a large pile, if you will, of information that Esri creates some insights out of.
To my understanding, Esri takes U.S. Census data and adds an additional layer of analysis, more in depth than what we'd expect from the U.S. Census. So.
And last question, from the time that you began this project, how long did it take you to completion?
Great question. So I say that because this project was actually done in two parts. We've had the pleasure of working with Commissioner Murguia for a previous engagement that was more general. And in this engagement that we took upon as an extension of that, we were able to look more specifically at these businesses. I would say that when we started in, help me out here, Wilson. Started in January, and we probably finished this late March, so 8-10 weeks about, and that does like Wally mentioned, and we are students, so this is unfortunately is not a full-time occupation, but we were pretty satisfied with the turnaround of our work. So.
And you mean January of 2016?
Yeah.
Yes.
Oh, well, that's amazing. Okay, thank you again. Congratulations.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Gentlemen, once again, thank you so much for your presentation tonight. Great work.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
We are going to go ahead and move back to the committee agenda now. We had left off at item number 3. Item number 3 was a proposal to acquire, renovate, and operate the closed municipal parking garage at 6th and State. Okay. Do you want to? We're going to, as they say in the music industry, vamp for just a moment.
Yeah.
We've had a couple of commissioners who needed to step out. They should be right back.
Are you ready for May 22nd?
Yes, I am. Last one. And you?
Yes. Sooner the better.
Yes.
Did you get a job lined up for him for the summer? He can renovate the garage.
I've been thinking, actually, I have, I think right now three boys committed for summertime work. Although this project may take a little more.
Commissioner Townsend, just to keep you updated on status here, Commissioners Walker and Murguia needed to step out for just a moment. Expect them back anytime now. So we're just going to hold Mr. Goff's presentation momentarily, and if it looks like it's going to stretch too long, we will just go ahead and start this presentation in a couple of minutes.
Thank you for the update.
Murguia and Walker have rejoined us. So, Mr. Goff, if you would go ahead and take care of this presentation.
Thank you, Commissioner, and good evening, Commissioners and staff. Marlon Goff with Economic Development. We do have a presentation tonight regarding the municipal parking garage, but first, I'll introduce my guest to the left, Mr. Tony Privatera. I believe many of you guys are familiar with Mr. Privatera. He's a principal with Mark I Electric. Here more recently, as he's continued to expand his investment portfolio of commercial properties in our community. more recently, he responded to a proposal from our department regarding redevelopment proposals for the municipal parking garage. So,
Hello?
good evening.
Thank you.
So, to start, again, this is a presentation regarding a redevelopment proposal in the garage, but really it's also a conversation about the demand we've seen for dedicated parking. You know, a positive outcome of the recent investment we've seen in the downtown corridor with the number of commercial transactions, you know, has presented a challenge for staff to assist these new business and existing business owners in identifying adequate parking for their new tenants. And so what we've done is, you know, we've worked with Mr. Privatera to come up with a term for our redevelopment agreement. And you'll see in some of the next slides, this is an illustration of the existing municipal parking lots in downtown as published by our parking control staff. We'll focus, and this screen may be a little difficult to see, we'll focus your attention to what we describe as parking lot B. In this aerial view, you'll see the garage labeled just at the intersection of 6th and State Avenue. That 3-story parking structure is immediately adjacent to the Crossline Towers at 7th and State Avenue. So a quick snapshot overview of the history of this site. We've seen construction plans as early as the 1950s. The appraiser has this structure completed in 1954. And you see in 2008, as a result of ongoing capital repairs and serious structural concerns, the garage was decommissioned. This site was actually before you a couple years ago as part of the Crossline Towers redevelopment project. At the time, we entered into a memorandum of understanding with that project developer while they attempted to secure permanent financing. And then earlier this year, we decided to exercise our reversionary clause in that property, again, in sight of the ongoing demand for parking. You know, our staff, you know, we had ongoing requests for long-term lease agreements or acquisition for some of the surface lots. When we look at, you know, the highest and best use for a lot of those properties, you know, we kept coming back to what are we going to do with the parking garage, you know. So we met with our public works staff, we met with Patrick Waters in the legal department, and, you know, just to get a better understanding of what it would take, and do we need to move forward with original plans for demolition, or could we stabilize this garage? And so Mr. Privatera, you know, as part of his proposals, you know, he shared some of the inspection photos, and we'll just scroll through a couple of these, but this will give you, you know, kind of a sense of the scale that this redevelopment project will entail. Mr. Alva, you appreciate the photo on the right, you know, so on the top level of the garage, you know, we have transformer utilities that will also be included as part of the permanent easement. So that'll be written into the legal description and recorded in the deeds that those utilities will remain in place. But again, this will be a pretty comprehensive redevelopment project. So real quickly, these are some of the key terms that we're calling out for in the redevelopment agreement. It's about $1 million in total project costs, including acquisition, and that'll return up to 300 parking stalls back to the central business district. Also important to us is we're asking, and Mr. Privatera's agreed to allow for 50 permanently dedicated stalls, you know, as needed for UG vehicles, juror overflow parking. And then finally, we'll also include a reversionary clause with this agreement for substantial completion within 12 months. So again, here's an overview of the preliminary project costs. The county assessor has the land value of the garage at just over $160,000. So we just use a factor of $20 per month over a period of 15 years. We feel like we'll achieve that value by by virtue of having the dedicated parking stalls for UG vehicles. So with that, I want to give Mr. Privatera an opportunity to really talk about, his company's history with operating parking facilities in the metro, and maybe what more he has planned for this particular project.
Sure, and I'm here to answer any of your questions too. My name's Tony Privatera. The name of the company that would be purchasing this parking structure is Corrogito. It's kind of a funny name, but it stands for Carl, Rosie, Joe, and Tony. I'm Tony. I have a brother, Carl, and a sister named Rosie. And how it happened and how we arrived at it, it just kind of came out. Back in the 80s, our family, we grew up owning parking structures and parking lots in downtown Kansas City, Missouri. Matter of fact, we owned all of the parking structures across the street from City Hall all the way to what is now the federal courthouse in Kansas City, Missouri. And we had about 4,000 parking stalls there. And when I was a high school student, we used to go down there and park cars for city officials. It was a lot of fun. That was how we learned how to drive stick shifts at the time. So we have a lot of experience with managing and running parking structures. And with our construction business, we've been on the team of probably over 25 parking structures in the Kansas City area. So I have a good understanding of what it takes. There's a lot of concrete, there's a lot of lights, and a lot of maintenance after the fact, which this particular structure is lacking. I brought in a couple of really good practical structural engineers to help us make a good educated decision on, is this monstrosity fixable? And we came to the conclusion that it was. So we'd like to tackle it. At this moment in time, we've been buying buildings and more buildings and more buildings in the Kansas City, Kansas area. And we see something in downtown Kansas City, Kansas. I've become a believer in downtown Kansas City, Kansas. And maybe we're a little early, it's possible, okay? But we see a huge change coming, and we'd like to get in on the ground floor. I'm here to answer any questions.
So, Tony,
Yes.
would you go back one or two slides?
Sure.
One more. So the last bullet point, buyers engage Crosslines Tower and
Yeah.
surrounding. So
Good
what-
question. I spoke to Mr. Hughes of the Crossline Towers and worked out an agreement with him that if I'm successful in obtaining this garage, that I will make sure that he has parking for what he needs for his project at a fair and marketable rate. I did not agree to a price because I don't really know where I'm going to be, but we discussed it, and he has parking for the Crossline Towers within our plan.
Where do they currently park? On the surface lots?
I really don't know.
All over, okay.
Yeah, I asked Mr. Hughes, just, for curiosity, how many of his residents, for example, have registered vehicles? It's a, specific population that currently resides there. And to that point, in talking with our parking control staff, they don't have very many stalls reserved currently in the other surface lots that you saw on the map. So I think part of his plan is to hopefully attract a profile of tenants that he doesn't currently have as part of the redevelopment project. And so as part of the financing, having to be able to establish that he has adequate parking associated with the project.
Originally, was this a city-owned lot or a parking garage, or was it built as part of the townhouse hotel?
Yeah, so, our staff, dug through the Register of Deeds records, and I like to say that, wish we could say that the method of record keeping was the same in the early 50s as it is
In other words,
right
you
now.
don't know.
When we searched through a number of deeds and title transfer, best we could come up with is we do know when the city of Kansas City, Kansas acquired title to the property, that being in 1984, and we know the date of construction. So I'm not exactly certain, if it was built as part of the hotel project or previously Crossland Towers.
Any other questions, any comments, any further discussion about this item?
Move approval and the item be fast-tracked to May 5th.
Second.
There's a motion and a second that we approve the terms as outlined by Mr. Goff and fast-track this to the May 5th commission meeting. Is there any further discussion? Hearing none, roll call, please.
Roll call, Alvey.
Aye.
Walters.
Aye.
McGee.
Aye.
Townsend.
Aye.
Walker.
Aye.
McKiernan.
Aye. It'll be wonderful to have parking spaces.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Absolutely. So item number 4 on our committee agenda tonight is a report from Department of Motor Vehicle Registration. And I do believe Ms. Debbie Pack is here, and Maddie as well. Great to have you here.
Thank you. Good evening, and I'm Debbie Pack, Director of Revenue, and this is Maddie Waldeck, the Deputy Director. We are here because we wanted to bring some information that we thought was important for you to see, because we realized that the community survey that we all looked at a few weeks ago didn't shine a very favorable light on motor vehicle registration. As you recall, citizens voiced a strong opinion that motor vehicle be the #1 priority for county services to be improved, that there was a 4% decrease in satisfaction, and that there was a 37% level of dissatisfaction in general. Those results were a little disappointing to my staff and I, because over the last few years, we've done a lot to work very hard to try to improve the taxpayer's experience when they come into the motor vehicle registration offices. We believe the results from those surveys, there's a couple factors that are going on with those results. One is timing. As you all know, when you purchase a car, you have to come into the motor vehicle office to title that car and register it. That doesn't happen for everyone every day. It's usually, in my mind, every 5 to 7 years. So if you came in 5 years ago, even between the years of 2012 and 2014, I certainly couldn't blame you for giving these negative comments on this survey, because in 2012, that was the year that the state implemented the infamous new motor vehicle system that was going to do all and be all. Another factor that we think has something to do with it is kind of customer behaviors. Customers are still walking in the door when they don't need to. There's a lot of options for renewals and things like that, and we're still seeing significant numbers of customers walking in the door. There's many reasons for that, whether it's financial or they forgot or whatever, but we're still seeing a lot of those. We also believe that taxpayers aren't utilizing the enhancements that we've given them. We've given them options of online queuing and not having to sit in the office, and they're not utilizing that as much as we'd like to see it. One of the other things that we see a lot of in our complaints is that the taxes in Wyandotte County are high. The sales tax and the property taxes are among the highest in the state. We certainly understand that people's perceptions are going to stay with them a long time. So if they came in 4 or 5 years ago and they had a bad experience, we know it's going to take a lot to get them to feel positive about us. So we've tried to put in a lot of improvements and tried to be very conscientious about how we can improve the service that we're giving ours. Tonight we're going to give you some of the results from our own internal survey, and plus we're going to show you some of the data that we've been tracking to make sure that we're going about business the right way, to see if things are improving. So first I'll have Maddie go over some of our survey results for you.
So we implemented our own internal survey on July 20th of 2015. Constituents can fill out those surveys one of 3 ways. One, they can go online to our website. 2, we have in our signature of our emails an invitation to fill out a survey of the service that they received through email. And also, the biggest response we get is from our text message from the kiosk. So when you put in your cell phone number to put yourself in line for a motor vehicle registration or renewal, once your ticket is coded as complete, you'll get a text message with an invitation to take a survey. At the time that we put this presentation together, we received 1,469 responses. 95% of those have been from text messages. We ask several questions. First question is, what facility did you visit? We see a higher response rate from the annex facility. How did you check in? Right now, it's a 50-50 between the kiosk and online. We'd really like to see the percentage of people checking in online to increase. The more people do that, the more they see the benefit of the online check-in process. This is a summary of our results thus far. First, how would you rate the check-in system? You can see that we break out the survey responses for positive and negative, so they can answer these questions on a scale from poor to excellent. We consider anything that they answer poor or fair to be a negative response, anything that is good, great, or excellent to be a positive response. So of those 1469 of surveys that we've gotten so far, almost 87% have a positive response to the check-in, 90% positive response to our customer service, 95% positive response to our level of knowledge, and 84% positive response to our overall experience. In addition to those questions, we also ask if they would like to have any comments or questions. We also welcome them to leave their contact information if they'd like to be contacted by a supervisor about their experience. We also encourage them to leave the name of the person that helped them so we can give that person recognition during our staff meetings. So this is just a summary of the responses from the previous slide. One of the things that we're proud about is that the 3 best responses in these questions account for the 3 largest percentages within each category. You'll see that the best response that anybody can give in these 4 questions also account for the highest percentage. In addition to tracking those questions, we also track when people complain. On the right-hand side, you'll see a chart that says red days versus all other days. Red days are the days you don't want to come into our office. Those are the last 2 business days of the month and the first 2 business days of the month. So you'll see that red days account for about 20% of our work month. But from our data tracking, we've seen that the time that people complain, it accounts for almost 2/3 of the complaints that come in. So the people that wait until the last minute are the people that are also who we hear the most complaints from. In addition to that, we also what people complain about. We notice that the people that complain, we have the biggest segment of complaints are 35% for the wait time. That's also correlates with the previous slide with the people that complain the most are the people that come in on the busiest days. We also have people complain about the check-in. People don't really understand how it works. People get frustrated if somebody checks in online and they get to check back in when they come into the office. They don't really understand how it works, and so people get really frustrated. They think if your number is called and you're not in the office that you should start at the end of the line, but that's not how the system works. And then the 3rd largest wedge is the fees and taxes. We hear a lot of complaints about how high our tax rate is, and also about the $5 in-office renewal fee. We hear complaints about our customer service. This again plays into, we try to ask the person who's filling out the survey to leave the name of the person that they came into contact with, so we can really troubleshoot those problems from the ground. We talk about building complaints. People complain that it's too hot, too cold, the carpet's dirty, there isn't enough parking, things like that. So we really try to improve the office to make sure that those people are accommodated. And the lowest percentage is low staffing. So I'll turn it over to Debbie to talk about more of our data tracking.
So besides the survey, what we've been doing internally is doing some tracking of the data for the data that we can control. One of the pieces that we track is our cutoff for title work. Back in 2012, we soon realized that we weren't going to be able to take customers till 5 o'clock and process titles because we were finding times that we had staff there till 8:30 at night because the process takes so much longer. So we had to really evaluate when we could take titles and when we couldn't. So the choice was made that we would cut off early on certain days. That kind of leveled out so that the current situation is we cut off title work at 2 o'clock on Mondays and Fridays. This is what's published. And we cut off title work at 3:30 on Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. Back until about 6 months ago, we did no title work on the last day of the month because renewals were so heavy. But we have put that back into place because we feel like with the queue system, we can manage that much better. So what this graph shows us is that if we average out what that goal is, it's 2:54 p.m. between all 5 days of the week. Back in 2004, October of 2004, when we started tracking this data, we couldn't even make it till 11 a.m. without cutting off titles because the system was telling us how many people were in the queue and how long it was going to take us to get those people processed. So back in 2004, we couldn't even make it till 11 a.m. And one of the big reasons for that was because we had a shortage of staff. Our staff wasn't trained well. We had a lot of system issues still in 2004, and there was really no way to track. So since that time, we've ramped up our staffing process by working with HR. What we found is it was taking us 6, 8, 10, 12 weeks to get somebody hired and in the system. So we did a lot of work with HR, and we worked with the union to get that position filled more quickly. We implemented a formal training protocol. We added 2 provisional positions, and we enhanced the queuing system. So what we've seen, our data show, is that in 2015 we were able to exceed our average throughout the entire year. And what we're seeing now in 2016, our average cutoff time in 15 was 3:30. Our average cutoff time so far in 2006 is 4 o'clock. So that means we're being able to keep our offices open longer, be able to service those people, and still maintain a competent level of comp time and keeping our staff getting out of the office. Another indicator that we've tracked, because it's really important to us, is what happens when we cut off that title work. What happens to those customers? So something we were tracking was how many customers are we turning away on an average basis. So what this graph shows us that in 2014, our monthly average was 368 people. And that was, as you saw, that other one that we weren't meeting any deadlines. 2015, we were able to cut that over in half to 149 average per month. And so far in 2016, we've cut that down to 56 on average per month. So we're pretty happy about where those numbers are going. We certainly hope they keep going a little bit farther. The next thing I wanted to talk about was tax rates, because we talked about tax rates in our initial. This graph just shows that the graph on the right is something that's provided to us from the state. It averages out, the way property taxes and motor vehicle are assessed is that it's the average rate of every county mill levy, the average for the whole county for 2 years ago. So for the 2017 taxes that you'll pay, it's the average from 2015. So if you can look at us, the last one on that line, our average is 175,363. Because we deduct the 20 mills for the school district, that means that our mill levy for motor vehicles is 155,363. That's the 11th highest in the state. It's 36% higher than the average, which is the 134 at the bottom of the graph. So that's something that we hear a lot of complaints about. As we have implemented things like the $5 in-office renewal fees, some other things we're tracking is are these implementations making an effect on the way people do business? And what we're seeing, you can see in 2014, this is just renewals because these are the people that have options. In 2014, 80% of those people were coming into our offices. In 2015, that dropped 8% to 72%. And in 2016, our average is 65%. But what I also like to look on this graph is that you'll see the online number going up consistently also, which is really where we want them to be, is online. It takes less time for us to process through the online process. So having said giving you all that data, I wanted Maddie now to go over some of the initiatives that we've actually put into place that we believe have helped us achieve these goals.
So we've already talked about the online check-in and the survey initiative. We also touched a little bit on red days. In addition to those just being heavy volume days, we also make sure that every window is full. We also dedicate 2 supervisors at each location to be floaters during the lunch hours, so that the constituents see a constant flow of the line as opposed to that normal lunch lull that everyone used to see. Debbie talked about this. We have a formal 2-week training for new hires. Previous to October of 2014, there was no formal training for people that came in that had virtually no motor vehicle experience. We have additional customer service training. We do that every year at our October meeting. We do a Treasury staff meeting. We also do it upon hire and then throughout the year as needed. We had the 2 additional provisional employees that we were able to hire in October of 2014. One went to the annex, one was for downtown. We have staff meetings that we call memos, and we go over things that collectively as a team we just need to work upon. We go over the survey data. We give staff recognition for any surveys that call them out by name, saying that they gave good service. and just kind of go over some team building activities. We have a lot better title turnaround with the implementation of the new motor vehicle system. The responsibility of approving the titles fell on the county with no additional resources to support that function. In 2014, when you came in to register your vehicle in our county, you could expect to wait 10 to 12 months to receive your title back in the mail. Now, if you come into the office, you'll receive your title back in the mail within 45 days. We do morale boosting initiatives. We do something fun called Payday Pancake Friday. Every payday, we cook some pancakes back in the break room and have breakfast together on our 15-minute break in the morning. We do Employee of the Quarter, where employees can earn points for doing things for customers or doing things for other employees in the office, and they'll get office recognition. We do things like Spirit Weeks. Think about when you were in high school and you had Spirit Weeks, and everybody votes on what their favorite day is. We did like Superhero Day and fun stuff like that. It also helps the customers kind of feel not so anxious to see us be real people. And then we also do office outings outside of work hours. We've also done education of customers. We sent a mailer out with the tax bills in November of 2014, introducing the online check-in as well as the $5 fee. We also have an inter-office tracking mechanism that we've developed. We're the only county in the state of Kansas that does this. It's an error tracking mechanism that basically shows us how we're processing titles. So when our title approvers approve titles, they audit them to make sure that they're in compliance with the statutes that the state has outlined for us. So we have a series of errors, and those errors are weighted according to severity. We average those points over the amount of transactions that that particular clerk has processed to give them what we call a PPT score. The lower the PPT, the better that we're doing. So this chart just kind of captures the fact that we're just steadily getting better at our title processing.
So as you can see, we've put a lot of things into place, not only for the customers, but for our employees, because we feel like if we can help our employees grow, then that's going to grow our business and help, they're going to have a better interaction with the customers. So some of the things that we're looking to the future for, some of the things that we have ideas about, and these certainly aren't fixed in place or anything like that, are getting a social media presence. We feel like that's going to be a way for us to educate the people have become so technology minded that we have to be able to reach them in mass ways. So we have to be able to give them information about what's going on, about where we are, how we're doing in the what the new statutes are and everything like that. So we're thinking about maybe a social media presence. We're considering more employees. We do have physical space restrictions. However, we still are seeing, as you can see by the statistics, we're still seeing long wait times. The problem we have with that is we also always have to balance that against what is the need and what our financial resources are. So we don't always need those staff members, but we might need them 2 or 3 weeks out of the month. How do you address those issues? We've looked at ideas like extended office hours. We've tossed around this idea several times. However, there's a lot of factors that we have to consider. We have to consider staffing, because if we extend the office hours, we're either going to have to hire more people, and there's going to be times during the day that our staffing levels are going to be down. We have to consider security. We have to consider how we're going to get these taxpayers in and out of buildings. So those are big issues for us. People are always telling us, well, why don't you stay open longer? It's not that simple for us. One of the other things that we've talked about many times is consolidation of our offices to one location. We feel like consolidation of offices into one location would help us become a better oiled machine, because we have all the resources in one place. It would enable us to combine those resources and be more consistent with the messages that we're giving. And something that was kind of interesting to us, Johnson County paid to have a study, an efficiency study done on their motor vehicle process this year. And one of the recommendations that came out from that study was for them to consolidate their offices. So that's just something that we kind of looked at, and that's something in our mind. We know there's issues with that too, so that's why, it's one of those things. And one of the other things that we're looking at and we're really moving forward with this year is building logistics. We've put into the budget request some information for parking issues out at the annex. If you've ever been there at the end of the month, we used to have people out in those streets there'd be people in the streets on the end of the month. Right now, the way we've resolved that is we've closed the drive-through for 4 days a month because we can't control the traffic. So we've basically closed that service to our customers. The other problem out there is that there's not enough parking for the people that are coming in there with the appraiser and us and our staff and there. We used to have an agreement with the church that's kind of been back and forth a little bit, but parking is a big issue out there. Some of the other issues is just logistics for the physical space, so we're looking at redesigning some of the space. We're looking at adding more check-in kiosks so that people can have a better opportunity to check in. They're not waiting so long for that type of information either. We get a lot of calls, and we talk to a lot of people. Maddie, as she said, she talks to people from these surveys. They're always, we're always wanting suggestions because we want people who are coming in from the outside to give us suggestions. It's not that we can always do them, but we would certainly like to evaluate them and see if the resources and the efficiencies make sense to us. So we're always looking for those recommendations. So that's all we have for you tonight. Are there any questions? And we would like to say we appreciate your support because we know it's a difficult process, but we do appreciate your support when the bad times happen.
Any comments, any discussion, questions?
I just want to say that I think you've made amazing improvements. You're a busy department. You're working constantly. There are people coming in all the time. And I know there's a lot to deal with. And I personally think you're understaffed, and that leads to a lot of the issues that you have. And I just think you've made amazing progress. But until we put more money into your department, I just don't. Hope you can get better, but I think until you get to where all of us are going to say that's a great department and people are satisfied and you're getting good survey results, we have to invest some money there.
Thank you.
And somebody in this room, it was me, showed up on what I now know is a red day. And I will say that the on-cue system dramatically accelerated or cut down the amount of time that I needed to spend physically waiting for my appointment. And so I think we need to continue to educate people about the existence of the on-cue system or whatever it is called, because that ability to get that 30-minute warning and have time to leave the building and do other things, because as I left the building, I noticed there were a lot of people who were just hanging around, and I assume because they did not have that text.
They have the option, even if they walk in the door and get their number, to use that texting functionality. We just haven't gotten that mindset, that change in the people's minds to say, I don't know whether it's they say, I've already paid for parking, I don't want to leave, or what that is. Everyone has that option, whether they check in online or they check in at the kiosk, to do that as long as the wait time is less than 45 minutes. But we just haven't convinced people that that's what they should do. What's still concerning to me is that even though you don't have to sit in the office for 3 hours, the wait time's still 3 hours or 2 hours. But we're still helping you by having you be able to do other things.
Right.
And we see a lot of comments in that regard.
Commissioner Walker.
I think I said it the night of the survey. I don't think the survey accurately reflected the experience or the changes that have been made in your operation. Parking is terrible out there. That's not your fault. That's, I suppose, arguably our fault for not having a building that has adequate parking. The tax rate is not your fault. People, I'm generally not very happy when I have to go write a check either to the government or to a private business, and so any inconvenience or slight or lack of attention, or if I see someone walking around, they've just been at a stall and they've done somebody and now they're walking around and they're going into the back room, and I don't know what they're doing, but I'm assuming they're going back and having coffee and donuts, and so there are inherent biases in an experience like yours that I did not feel were adequately addressed in the survey. I'm not saying people don't have bad experiences and that there aren't bad days, but I never have had any fun paying my taxes at your shop, okay? So you start out with 2 strikes against you when I walk in the door. And I have to say, the last 3 or 4 times that I've not taken advantage of the technology and gone in, I haven't had that long of a wait. The experience has been good. The people treated me, and I'm absolutely certain most of them didn't know who I was. So it had nothing to do with me being a commissioner. In fact, some of the times I'm speaking of, I had been retired, and they didn't know me from Sam Hill. So keep doing the changes, keep working, and you know, we'll try to help. Certainly, if we lowered the taxes, I'm sure that would help a lot. But certainly, parking, I will admit, is I hate to go out there and park. It is a nightmare of driving around until you either get one or finally give up and come back later. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Appreciate you being here.
Thank you for the opportunity.
Absolutely. And that's going to take us to item number 5 on the committee agenda, and that was the blue sheeted item. And Mr. Brakovich, are you going to be the staff person?
I am.
I'll give a little bit of a setup here. One of the things, as we talk about tax rates, one of the things that would help lower property taxes for any individual in the county and the city is if we grow our tax base. That is, more residential and more commercial buildings that pay taxes, spreading the burden of the tax or the budget pressure of the tax over more payers. We know that sometimes projects that could bring new residential or new commercial development into the city face gaps. That is, the developers have sharpened their pencil and we've used all the incentives at our disposal, and there still is a gap that prevents the project from moving forward. And so we've been talking it's been a couple of years now, about the possibility of the government having what we might call a gap fill fund, and that is a pool of cash that the government could invest in projects that would bring a return and that would be beneficial for growing the tax base and beneficial for the community. So what we have tonight is I'll back up. We have now actually budgeted some money for said fund, but we haven't clearly articulated how the fund will operate and what criteria might be in play for evaluating projects and moving them forward. So we have a real-life case study here with us tonight. There is a project that has come forward in the Argentine district, or in Commissioner Murguia's district, that is facing a gap, and we're going to use this specific project as the jumping off point for a discussion on how we might structure the fund to assist projects in moving forward. My understanding is that this item is up for presentation and discussion, but we have no action pending on this item this evening. Is that correct?
Correct.
All right. Mr. Brakovich.
Thank you, Commissioner. Good evening. Let me make a couple quick introductions. Of course, you know Kathleen. Cord Maxwell with Polsinelli representing the developer, and Jeff Sharp with Ferguson Properties, who submitted the development proposal for the site. Thank you for the segue and the great intro on this. There we go. So it is, again, tonight we're here for informational purposes only, and again, trying to get some direction on this economic development grant. So you'll recall for year 2016, we introduced this initiative suggesting that we have $3 million available in grant monies to help with gap financing a project. It is my understanding that we'll have to issue debt to come up with that money. That was part of some initial conversations with the former CFO and bond counsel, trying to determine exactly how we would get that money put out there. But nonetheless, we've suggested that we would have $3 million available for gap funds. So the proposed site that I want to talk about tonight is an interesting piece of property. And if you saw the title of the slides, it was 18th Street Expressway right-of-way redevelopment. And I think that's a pretty accurate description of what the proposal is. So in this picture, towards the bottom right-hand corner, you'll see a star. And then you'll see a small parcel. That small parcel is owned by the city of Kansas City, Kansas. To get you situated, that's 18th Street heading south, I guess, towards the bottom of the picture. And then Metropolitan Avenue. We've highlighted a few of the retailers that are already part of the Metropolitan Avenue TIF project. You'll recall we have two project areas, and I've got a slide later that details that a little bit better. But the property itself, it's about a 2-acre piece total, give or take, guys. All right. Okay. And again, it's that piece encompassed by the star to include the small square owned by the city of Kansas City, Kansas. So why is the UG marketing or trying to redevelop excess KDOT right-of-way? Well, we entered into an option agreement for the purchase of real property with KDOT in 2014. It's a 3-year term. Some of the conditions of that are that KDOT still retains the ability to review the development plan. The deed's going to have some sort of restrictive covenants regarding proper structuring or lateral support for the highway. I think they're acknowledging they don't need all of that right of way, but they also acknowledge they're not exactly sure how much of it they need, and I'm sure Jeff's had some great conversations with design and engineers to that end. And then obviously if we sell this property, there's a 50% split of the proceeds with KDOT. So we're well within the time limit of this agreement. We did some initial marketing of the property. There was physical sign advertising it. We added it to our list of marketing properties that were available, and we decided to proceed with the development proposal from Ferguson Properties to do a retail center here. So I've got a couple of slides on project proposal, but I think what I'll do is, I know the developer, they've got their own presentation. I'd rather turn it over to them, let them roll through the project, and then we'll kind of come back to the way staff has been evaluating the proposal. So Tim, if you can tee up theirs, I'll hand it over to Corb, and then there you go. I think that's it. Right. Yep.
Thanks, George. Again, for the committee, Corb Maxwell with the Polsinelli firm, Jeff Sharp with Ferguson Properties, and then also have a number of folks from the Argentine neighborhood here with us, including Mario Escobar, the executive director of the Argentine Betterment Corporation, that have been working on this project. So, highlighting what George said and sort of agreeing is this is the property we're talking about. We listed as 0.291 acres. I believe that's just that one UG-owned lot. Just like George, it's a little under 2 acres is the property that we're discussing with the right-of-way piece. And getting into it of what is the opportunity in front of us. The opportunity in front of us is to put, some may call it, or something that I heard earlier, a food court setup or a food court area. It's funny that came up and was in the students' presentation, because that is basically what we're proposing. We have 3 retailers that are today ready and willing to move forward and would like to move forward on this site. The first is a 1,800 square foot Dunkin' Donuts, where we have been going back and forth with Dunkin' Donuts on an LOI for the furthest southern piece of the property. And then we just received an LOI last week, approximately, about a week and a half ago, from a Wendy's and Pizza Hut combination all in one building. That would be approximately 4,000 square feet. This would be the first in the nation Wendy's and Pizza Hut combination. I think folks have seen or probably been to often that you can have Pizza Hut and Taco Bell's together, or Pizza Hut and other retailers that are part of the Yum Brands network. This is based on NPC, which is a local franchisee that owns a ton of Wendy's franchises and then also owns a ton of Pizza Hut franchises, that when we proposed them the site, they came back and said they wanted not just one of the concepts, but 2. The jobs we've asked, given this is the Economic Development Committee, for a little bit of input of what would the job makeup look like and what would the wages look like that would come into these 3 different positions. And what we've generally found is that there would be approximately 71 jobs between all of the various components of this, and that's made up from crew members at starting salaries of $7.50 to $8, and working up to the general manager in $30,000 to $40,000 type jobs. So very very working class entry level jobs, but as I think the students showed also, jobs that could be available for many in the neighborhood here. So we're going to build this sort of case up to kind of show you the numbers and ultimately get to a gap funding request. But what we've done first, and when we build these pro formas, is we look at and we start with what is the budget, what are the costs, and I break these down, and we have a lot more detail on this that we'll take staff through and we can go through with the committee as well. But generally, the good thing we've got going is that we have almost no land cost on this. Essentially, between KDOT and the UG, we are able to acquire the land for next to nothing. So we have an incredibly low land basis. Really, what that 32,000 is just surveys, title, clearing title, going through all of the things so that you can have the effective transfer of land. We then come to construction costs, and Jeff, along with folks they work with, this is not taking this all the way out to bid, but this is taking this out and putting pen to paper and going through based on the prototypes of the developments to look at the actual costs that are involved in this and come up with numbers. I will lead with, on a per square foot basis, these costs are pretty high, but they're real, and they are what they are. Essentially, they're high on a per square foot basis for two reasons. One, they're very small stores, and two, although the site is generally small, and you can see from sort of the setup of the topo and otherwise, we have a lot of site work to do to end up bringing this in. So we're getting 5,800 buildable square feet across the 2 acres, 2 pad sites out of it, but we have a lot of site work to be able to deliver that. So it ends up in some of those higher costs. And then we have soft costs, which come out to about 20 to 25% of the project costs. That is standard, I would say, in the pad site development business, or in these build-to-suit business of these individual pad sites, but also accounts for the financing plan that we have put together, and that we're going to show that we have to throw every trick at the book to try to make this work. And it is very, very similar in a lot of ways to what we saw in the Save-A-Lot grocery store across the street. There also we had approximately $3 million project between them, and we had to mix and match a variety of incentives to make it work. And why do we have to do that? And this really comes to where we sit today. So I told you we have LOIs. We have retailers that are ready and willing to go into the neighborhood, but those retailers do it with a caveat. And the caveat is that they need a brand new building built to their prototypes and specs, that it costs about somewhere around, when final numbers all come in, $3.3 million. But between them, they will pay about $70,000 in rent. So for Dunkin' Donuts, that means they would be paying about $17 per square foot in rent. And for Wendy's, they would pay about $10 per square foot in rent. I made this statement earlier when I was presenting to someone on this, but to put this in sort of context for those that are not doing real estate every day and are not working in this world every day, like Jeff and I and others are, if these retailers were locating in western Wyandotte County, if they were locating in Overland Park, if they were locating in the Northland, if they were locating in other places, they would likely be coming in and offering to pay 2 to 3 times this rent. I would say a standard market rate that they would look to pay would be somewhere in the $30 a square foot triple net rent. So they're willing to come, they're willing to do a deal, they're willing to work in the urban core and in the in east of 635 in an urban redevelopment project, but they're not willing to pay sort of market rent on that. And We obviously try. The easiest thing in the world, instead of coming before this committee and coming before the federal government and coming before everybody else, is to get a retailer to pay a higher rent. But they run it through their models, and the students did a wonderful job and brought up a lot of great information that I'm sure the commissioner and ABC and others will use. But in our world, where we work with these folks, they usually look at only 2 metrics, or really maybe 3 metrics. They look at population, they look at disposable income, and then they look at some other various stats about urban neighborhoods, and from that they then will make a proposal. So we are getting paid approximately that $70,000 of rent. We then have pro forma, what does it look like if we do a 1% CID on the project, and that comes up to about $23,000 that we can drive off of that. And then as this is in the NRA area, we would ask for an NRA on the project as well, and based on our calculations, that would drive about $51,000 in total income to the project. So we have approximately $146,000 that we can pro forma out and see as the income from the project that can be generated if this is able to move forward. And so what the final component of the puzzle is saying balancing sources and uses and figuring out sources and uses to how do I get my project built. Well, with $146,000 of income, we are going to have to take that to a bank. We are going to have to get a bank to lend on that. And so what I did was take a 1.2 debt service coverage ratio, which is what any bank is going to want on a project like this, meaning you have $1.20 of revenue for every dollar of payments you need to make, i.e. you have a 20% coverage. To show at least a $1.20 debt service coverage ratio, I picked an interest rate, I picked an amortization on the loan. I asked, what is the maximum loan I can drive? What is the maximum private loan I can go and get based on CID, NRA, and the rent? That came to $1.5 million. So you have your total project cost of $3.3, you take off $1.5 million. ABC has gone out and secured substantial federal grants for this project. They have secured grants in the amount of about $1,225,000. This is approximately $700,000 to the Dunkin' Donuts project and approximately $500,000 to the Wendy's and Pizza Hut project. So I count that as equity. It's much more complicated than that, fitting it into their formats, fitting it into their structures, and otherwise it's incredibly complicated and a lot of work, and it also is part of what leads to the high soft cost on this project. But it is $1.2 million. So if I take out the 3.3, I drop the $1.5 million, I drop the $1.2 million, I'm left with $550,000, i.e. the gap. The gap on this project to be able to get it done is $550,000. Now obviously we could have some luck. We could go out and work this and estimate it and bid it and have cost savings, and if that happens, we'll need less cash. But our best estimates right now of being able to deliver to this project on everything we know and where we are in this project right now is that to be able to move forward on this and be able to do this, we have a $550,000 gap that we need to be able to close to bring this project forward. With that, I'd stand for questions. Either Jeff or I would stand for questions of the committee or flip it back to George and allow him to finish out, and then we could come back around.
I'll follow your lead. We've got a few slides to.
No, that's fine.
Okay.
I was just going to say it's a bit unusual here that we have an actual project in front of us, but at the same time we're still trying to define some of the parameters of how the fund works. So we're a little out of order here, and hopefully we would have had all of our parameters laid out before we actually had a project. So I'm sure there's, at least I have some questions that are not reflective of your project, but just of the fund and how we administer it generally. So I just want to make that clear before we get into questions. But George, go ahead.
Well, thank you. Probably another good segue to some of the, I guess, factors that staff is considering along with this request. So they already went through their proposal details. they've stated accurately, and this is just a different way of restating what they've already said because it came from the exact same pro forma that they've submitted. So if we look at the CID, it is suggested to be a 1% sales tax add-on for a 22-year term, and the pro forma suggests that that should be able to get about $591,000 out of that incentive stream. NRA, again, it does qualify for a 95% rebate for 10 years. The good news is there's very little existing base taxes, so the bulk of what they create goes right back to this project for 10 years. And again, their pro forma suggests that that's about another $518,000 worth of revenue from that incentive stream. Again, very impressive on the federal grant. I mean, we just don't see projects very often that have this level of federal grants being applied to it. And then ultimately, they ask again before us tonight is to consider an economic development grant in the amount of approximately $550,000. So some of the factors that we considered outside of the submittal and the pro forma that came through, and I'll give these guys a lot of credit. We were kind of under the gun in terms of getting everything, the clerk's deadline submittals for this standing committee meeting. So we're still kind of pouring through the details of that pro forma. But in addition to that, here's some of the other things we are looking at. So number one, again, it's the proximity to an existing TIF district. So the Metropolitan Avenue TIF. Again, if you look, the property we're talking about tonight is this piece here, and essentially right across the road. I actually took some measurements on our mapping system. It's about from about the middle of this. It's about 250 or so feet to this site, and about it's over 1,000 feet to kind of come down to the project area too. One of the things to consider again with the TIF is there are existing pad sites within the TIF. Again. And I didn't want to plagiarize or steal anything from Lane 4, but I did get this diagram which shows the Walmart, the Save-A-Lot. We actually had a discussion with this committee as well as full commission about putting South Patrol on this property here in the middle. And I know it's hard to read, but these are generally 1 acre plus pad sites that are part of that Lane 4 control. ABC, or Argentine Betterment Corporation, actually controls this pad site here as part of the Save-A-Lot project. So this correlates then back to this parcel map, gives you kind of maybe a better idea of the layout. Again, the dot represents the ABC-owned pad. Again, this is the other property. And then these are the 4 pads that Lane 4 is advertising. So why I think this is an important consideration is the part of the pro forma for this project, and Corb touched on it, was hey, there is almost $1 million worth of site work associated with this site. And so one of the things we wanted to consider is, well, if there's partners here that are either willing to sell or have that property put into the project, is there a way to have a lower overall cost and help benefit the TIF? And some of the preliminary findings we've been able to secure, it would suggest that it would be a less expensive option to go to the pad sites than it would be to develop this 2 acre pad. Another factor, again, related to the TIF is there is existing GO debt that's been issued for both of the project areas in the TIF. On the Save-A-Lot, we issued in 2013. Sorry, I was getting some edits done in preparation for tonight and just got a few of these done tonight, or earlier as the meeting had already started. So I know that these were issued in 2013. And that'll be important because the next few slides talk about how well the revenue is performing on these sites. But just to kind of set the stage, $1.6 million for Save-A-Lot came from the property tax, and then we had a local sales tax agreement. Then we did 3.7 in GO for the Walmart neighborhood market in 2014. Again, to be fair, $1 million of that went to public infrastructure improvements at about 24th and Metropolitan, and then 2.7 million back for the grocery store. As I was going back through our original presentation material when we did both of these projects, one of the components we had on those presentations were discussion of these outlots or pads. And again, even as we developed that, we always acknowledged that the pad sites weren't really reflected in the projected pro forma, but future development of that could help pay down this debt that we did issue. So this slide should look familiar because this is what Lou put together in July when we were talking about South Patrol. and we wanted to talk about how well the projects were performing, or the revenue from each project area was covering the debt. So in talking with finance, these were all issued initially as 20-year terms on the debt. So this project, according to Lou, in 15, so after it already had 2 years of issue, had about 3 years, had about 8 years left if the revenue projection continued on. So it's performing well and could pay off early. And then, looks like we missed one slide. Sorry, probably while we were editing. Let me give you some of the details. I'm not sure why it's not on this, but Project Area 2, revenue again, it was issued in 2014, 20-year term. But last year, with Lou's projections, it was actually well over the estimated forecast, and it was projecting a payout in about 9 years. So I think one of the questions we said is, great, I mean, those projects are performing well, but what about if we could move this particular type of development, which we heard a great, the tapestry analysis was fantastic because we know there's an extremely strong market for it. I think one of the policy level discussions that we need direction from you guys on is how do we juggle these requests? Clearly there's a need for it. Clearly there's a project that needs about $500,000 in incentives to get land, essentially help get the land prepared for the development. But we've got a TIF where we've already issued some GO debt, and maybe there's a possibility of attracting those types of developments that could fit on those pad sites and paying that already issued GO debt down faster. And again, the project itself stands on its merits. Clearly, we heard a great argument tonight for why it's needed. Tonight was the first time I saw the job creation numbers. That's great. I mean, I would have never guessed it was going to generate 71 jobs. But again, to come back to the policy level discussion that Commissioner McKiernan alluded to earlier, that's really kind of the feedback I'm looking for as a staff person that's evaluating a grant proposal like this. That's really what I'm after.
Well, I will tell you I have more questions than I have feedback, and these really are questions for staff and questions for other commissioners on policy level issues. And there are some, for me anyway, there are some specifics of this project that I'm not sure should come into play because there are some things that we might say, well, there's a specific thing about this project that, well, we don't want to consider that. And I think we need to back off from that and go a level higher than that. For example, one of my questions is, do we drive location of the project? Is that something that we do, regardless of what project it is in what area? How much do we drive the location? Because we're talking about 250,000 feet away. Do we do that? And if we do, under what circumstances would we do that? Do we drive it to a TIF area? Do we drive it to an NRA area? Do we drive it to where there's an oak tree? I mean, those are some things that I wonder about, is how much do we drive the location of a proposed development? I will say that I'm one of the people who initially advocated for this fund to be created because I saw a project that did go down with a gap that could have been closed. But I am disappointed that we're issuing debt for this. I had envisioned a cash fund that we would spend down and not issue debt, that we had cash that we could help invest. And so I will just say, from my perspective, as we look long term, I'd love to have a pool of cash, not a pool of debt, that we could dedicate toward filling gaps, which would certainly be much more advantageous to us in the long run. I'm fine. We've already said this year we're going to issue debt. But as this fund evolves, I'd love to see it be a cash-based fund that doesn't get any additional debt. So I'll just throw out some of the questions that came up as I think about this type of fund, regardless of what project it is. Does geography drive the fund? Does location within the county? Does being in NRA 1 versus NRA 2 versus NRA 3 drive some aspect of the scoring or the eligibility for getting these funds? Is it a first come, first served fund? That is, if we have X amount of dollars, is it simply good projects line up? And if you happen to be first in line, then good for you. I will say that's how I initially envisioned it. It would be just that. Are all other incentives still at play? So have we exhausted all of our other incentives before the gap fill comes into play? That is, have we used CID? Have we used NRA? Have we used TIF? Are all of those to be exhausted, or how much exhausted before we put our cash into the project? Another question I had was, do we have some sort of a gap fill money to project value ratio that we want to hit? Or is there some sort of a return on investment that we envision for this? And because it struck me as we were looking here at the value of the project versus the value of, or the amount of the gap, I wonder if there's a ratio that we might want to consider. I don't have the answer to that. Who evaluates the gap? Is it possible that we get a third party who evaluates the gap and asks, is the gap real? And can it be closed without the UG investing cash or debt into it? Are there specific projects that get preference for gap fill? Retail versus housing versus mixed use? So I don't have any answers. All I have is a whole bunch of questions that I think come into play as we evaluate not this project but this fund overall that might get applied to this project. So I've exhausted my questions. Commissioner Walters?
Well, you touched on a few of mine. I think when Doug Bach proposed this, one of the things he said was that one of his fears was that as soon as we establish a gap fund, every project will have a gap. And so I do think we need to do some analysis somehow, and a third-party review board of some kind is probably appropriate. And we're not the first entity that gives grants, so surely there are some proven best practices that we can look at and see how they affect our decision making. And I think we will have to, at some point say this project is not worthy and this project is, and we have to have some sort of analysis to do that. And I think what Brian mentioned was some sort of arithmetic needs to be involved. And if the taxpayers are going to invest in a project, I think, as Brian said, the purpose being growing our tax base. We need to figure out if it's growing our tax base or not, and over what period of time and how much. And we certainly will have to evaluate the risk and the likelihood that everything proceeds according to how we hope it will. We had a Wendy's in Bonner Springs at the K7 I-70 interchange, and it didn't last very long. I think it was only open about 3 years or so, maybe longer than that. So unfortunately, bad things do happen sometimes, and that's, if we're going to get into the investment game, we just have to accept that. But we do have to have absolutely the best information possible for our decision making. Those are sort of general 30,000 foot evaluations, not related to this particular project. The issues you bring up of the other project sites nearby is important. I don't know how to evaluate that, but I think you could spend some time on that and help us out too. We don't want to undermine our own investments if you think that might happen. So that's certainly a concern also.
I jumped right in with all my questions about the Phil Fund. Let me go back and just say, cool project. It really is. And if we can figure out how to close this gap, you can come north of the river, and we can do it all over again.
So I just have a couple of comments. So there is a little bit of confusion on our end. We approved the $3 million Economic Development Fund as a commission this last budget cycle.
Correct.
And my understanding was that that was an experimental fund to help us set these guidelines, that we were supposed to be looking for pilot projects to be able to move forward with them and figure out sort of a policy that could apply all over the county. So I want answers to all the same questions that Commissioner Walters and Commissioner McKiernan asked. But I would say as a novice developer, I would tell you, if we get caught up in trying to answer all these questions before we bring this deal forward for denial or approval, we'll lose the deal. And I'll tell you, and I'll be really blunt, I'm probably shooting myself in the foot here. If you all think that this deal is going to happen east of 635 right now under our current situation anywhere else, it won't. It will never get this good. The difference is that you all know, and I've never held never been a secret about this, is that I'm out there every day busting my hump to raise charitable dollars for this. This is $1.2 million in federal grant funding. It is specifically for low-income job creation. And not only can our Corb and Jeff saying that, using words and just telling you stuff, and is George saying, oh, that's great, but that 71 jobs is verified through a federal audit every year by the federal government, which is not a process that has to take place even on our jobs in western Wyandotte County and our more affluent areas. I'd also note that both current TIFs that we've done in that area, or both areas within the TIF, I should say, are performing. I would also add that that is old data because I'll just speak in regard that I have access to the Walmart information through Walmart corporate headquarters, and I've also confirmed that with our new financial officer. Last year, the Walmart neighborhood market in Argentine saw 117% increase in sales last year. Now, this is even, to me, more startling and more amazing, is that I was able to get this month's sales data. And they were looking at already 3 days ago, a 29% increase in sales in 1 month. We've already cut the payback timeline to the unified government from 17 years down to 7, I think you said, or 10, I can't remember, but it's almost in half. I think the standard, in my opinion, that we have set tonight, is way too high for other areas, other urban areas of our community. I think it will be difficult, given the resources available to those other neighborhoods, to come half as close to that. But I also don't think we should set policy or make decisions based on that, we have an anomaly or a situation that isn't common where, for good or bad, I'm able to raise a lot of money, however you want to look at it. Because I don't think that's fair. That's what I do for a living, and not every other commissioner does that. So I don't think that's a fair comparison or a standard we should set for everyone else. So with all of that information said, I appreciate all of your questions, but for me, as Corbett indicated, one of the ways we could decrease this gap is, instead of having development lawyers like Corb, who are paid hourly, come forward repeatedly while we develop a policy around a situation, that we allow some situations to become pilots and we learn from them as we move along. We have a history of incredible performance in a very low-income neighborhood in Argentine. We built a Walmart neighborhood market, the very first ever in our country, on a former Superfund site. We've raised millions and millions of private dollars. I don't know what else to do to make things move faster. And as far as growing the tax base, and if it's really making a difference, the ground virtually is donated. I personally went to Topeka. The governor personally gave, only because he was unallowed to give it to, directly to a not-for-profit because of state statute. It was given to the local government, and 50%, that's 50% more in ground sales, whatever the cost of the land ends up being factored in. We didn't even own it to begin with. So that move is making money for our local government cash up front at the moment it occurs. So I want answers to all those questions too. And if setting good policy was the key to redeveloping urban neighborhoods and making things happen like we're making happen in the Argentine neighborhood, then there wouldn't be any problem in this country with urban redevelopment. But you can go to almost every major city and you're going to see difficult neighborhoods like what we live in. So there is really nothing out there, at least I've never been able to find anything. And for me, you know, it seems more of a waste of money to pay lawyers, no offense, Corb. I'd rather not pay lawyers and pay developers, no offense, Jeff, but put the money into the project. But the only way we can do that and keep those costs down is to move it quicker and move it forward. So I don't know what to do from here. I guess I'm looking at this point from direction from George.
Well, I think the comments we're hearing from you, it just helps us better formulate how to go back and analyze their proposal. I mean, there's things we've already gone back and forth on: soft cost, hard cost, why this, what kind of finish. I mean, we're into the details with them, but not having really any policy direction of how to apply that analysis to a specific grant request. It just seemed like, well, let's do two things at once, and I think we'll continue to evaluate. Obviously, we'll continue to evaluate the proposal, but with this kind of policy input, we can better come back with the analysis to say, hey, look, I know, like for example, on this project, they're asking for NRA, but the sales tax is a CID add-on, and so we're not, the local generation of sales tax stays with the project. And I think that goes back to maybe your kind of a ratio of project value or return on that investment versus versus the grant or the incentive value of incentives going back into the project. I mean, those kinds of things help, but I think we were both getting to a spot, and I certainly don't want to put words in Corb or Jeff's mouth of, well, we just weren't sure if we were structuring the deal properly to reflect what we needed to show. Was the grant proposal in line? Was it a stretch? Is it, like you said, Commissioner McGee, is it a pilot? Should we be getting into all of these details? But you know, like all development deals, time is of the essence, and we thought, okay, it's the best thing to do is come to the committee, present what we have so far, get some input, and see if we can't redirect or better direct the end product.
So do we have to wait, sorry, Jim, do we have to wait for the policy to approve this deal?
Well, I think that's something we'll have to discuss with the county administrator and see what the comfort level is. I think a lot of the items we talked about tonight were already on the list. Some maybe not as specific detail as what we got tonight, but I think that, from my perspective, I could get a little more comfortable in preparing my end of the analysis as a reflection of these concerns. Do we do that in advance of formalizing the policy, or do we do that in a month's time, develop a policy, adopt a policy, and consider the first project? That's an aggressive time frame, but perhaps one that we could achieve.
And I don't understand why we need to adopt a policy before we approve this project or deny it, for that matter.
Well, I think, Commissioner, one of the reasons is we're spending public money, and we should have a policy. I don't understand why we had this meeting tonight, to be perfectly honest with you. Because all we've done is create a lot of information. You've gotten input from half the commission. I mean, my position is you bring back a proposal and we approve it, and or not, depending on what they vote.
Right.
I favor it as proposed. Obviously, I am concerned that every project the Corps brings forward now will have a gap in it. And I don't want to issue $3 million in debt every year to fund this thing. mean, that's ludicrous. Are we gonna fund $3 million that's from the get-go and drop it into a bucket? Can we do that legally and hold it for a period of time as projects come along, or do we have to just do the $549,000 and the cost associated with that each time a project comes forward? There are questions, but if we're gonna move forward with this fund, you know, policy sometimes follows action. You know, we can develop a policy and adopt it at the same time we either thumbs up or thumb down this project and move on down the road and learn from either our wisdom or our mistakes. I don't know how the other half of the commission will feel about this, but if you're waiting on a policy, we'll be waiting until September to get it done.
Well, we won't have a deal. We won't have a deal, because I tell you what, I'm not helping work on this even for my district as commissioner for 6 more months. And I obviously have worked personally on this. It's stringing, like I said, when we approved the $3 million, I don't know why we'd approve $3 million in an economic development fund when there's no policy there. I understood this to be a pilot program where we were going to develop a policy around projects that were brought forward. And now we're saying, after I personally, as commissioner, have gone out and advocated for my district and raised a ton of money to make this happen, now all of a sudden we've got to slam on the brakes and set policy. Well, I'm telling you guys, retailers are going to run right by Wyandotte County, at least the urban core. I mean, they may not run by Village West, but they're going to, because they're not, you know, they're stopping there, but they're going to run right through the urban core. If they were going to come on their own, they'd have come already. So that's where I'm at.
One of the things that strikes me is, and I certainly support pilot projects to help craft policy as we generate a project. But there is an issue of, I'm sure there's lots of other pilot projects out there that could be sitting here with their own gaps clearly articulated, but have we communicated to the community, we're looking for projects, we have this $3 million. We know it internally, but again, have we communicated out and noticed everybody on this?
Well,
I don't know that
I
that's...
haven't done it. I haven't saw, you know, I represent my district. I mean, that would be up to the other commissioners. We all knew that there was a $3 million fund because we all voted for it. It was unanimous approval. I mean, it's striking me as crabs in a bucket. If this isn't going to happen everywhere all at the same time under a policy, it's not going to happen.
I guess maybe to answer one of the questions, it's been our working policy to try to exhaust the bag of incentives that we already have in place as we evaluate proposals. And this is generally the first project where we've done the CID to a reasonable level. NRA is it's about as aggressive as we can get on a property tax incentive. And the project still has a gap. From my perspective, I'll just speak for myself or for my department, we see the value in this project, and that's why we're bringing it here. But we also realize that in very close proximity, we have already issued other public debt, and my opinion is that's a policy level direction I need from you, because I don't have a policy pertaining to this particular incentive to go fall back on. And so I guess at a very simple level, that's one of the questions I had tonight. One of the things that I didn't hear you guys say that we're strongly considering is, man, there's a $1.2 million grant match in this thing. And Commissioner McGee is right. Not every project comes forward with other grant match. And so that was one of the criteria we've been suggesting could flow back into the policy as well. But I get it. I get the concern over the timing, and I get the concern over the pilot, and I'll be happy to pass that message on to the county administrator.
Well, pass this along to him too. As far as this commissioner is concerned, the applicability of this economic development gap funding is east of 635 exclusively. Yeah. I'm not, and we can define, I'm using that as sort of an arbitrary, easy to understand boundary.
Sure.
Maybe it goes west a little bit in certain areas and some surveyor defines it But basically, this is an urban core gap, because in my opinion, you're gonna have your gap most often in an urban core area where your poverty is, where your median income is low, and where we have seen development is extremely hard. I'm not putting gap funding in Piper. I'm not doing it. We've put enough out in Piper. And I'm using Piper only because they've had such success, they haven't needed this. So, I don't know what the other commissioners think. I would say you bring us back a recommendation on this project with a proposal. We either thumbs up or thumbs down it, and in doing so, create the first policy.
That would be my suggestion, Mr. Brakovich, is have discussions with the county administrator and again with the developers. Bring us back for our first Monday of June Economic Development and Finance meeting, a solid proposal that we would then take action on.
Mr. Chairman, I have a couple of comments I wanted to make also on this.
Yes, ma'am.
Surely, I agree with the issues, items for consideration, policy considerations, whatever you want to call them, that you and Commissioner Walters articulated. And as Commissioner Walker said, it is essential that we address these. I know it's a bit maybe confusing because we have a particular issue that is before us, a possibility for development before us while we're trying to articulate the policy. But this is the same type of discussion that we had and was needed when we're talking about the business incentive grant funding. Whole lot fewer dollars involved. The $50,000 business incentive fund that was identified for development, and I think we call it economically distressed areas, which we also articulated were east of 635. So this is the kind of discussion we should have. Even as a Dunkin' Donuts lover, I know we should have that kind of discussion. And I think that we have to realize that we're doing this so that similar projects, whatever they are going to be treated similarly, or at least by a set of criteria that's going to be applicable to all. Having said that, if this project comes back, and I'm saying if, I'm sure that it will, that as part of this policy consideration, that I would recommend that when it comes back, because of the fund, and we're in our fledgling states of what we should be considering, that staff articulate exactly what it considered in evaluating the proposal when it comes back. You know, was it near a TIF? Have we already put money into it? All of the things that I've heard earlier tonight expressed, because whether we like it or not, we are setting policy as we will look at this again. So I think those are things that should be set out if and when we see this particular development project again, and thereby we start establishing policy for this fund. I, too, thought that it was cash that we had set aside, but I understand now that it's not. So, and that's neither here nor there for this particular issue, but as the fund itself, I was thinking it was more along what we had done with the business incentive grant funding. So those were my comments. I do have another question. How much of this $3 million has been expended heretofore? This would be the first application for it, for any part of those funds?
That is correct.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Gentlemen, thank you for your presentation tonight. Mr. Brakovich, you've gotten feedback, and our goal is to have an item for our first Monday of June EDF meeting.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. That is our final item of business this evening. We are adjourned.